This week, Aidan Holland from Censys is with us to discuss the state of Internet attack surface. Then Kelly Shortridge from Fastly joins us to talk about realigning the security industry. Finally, in the enterprise security news, some big acquisitions. Palo Alto picks up Talon, Travelers Insurance picks up Corvus, PagerDuty acquires Gelio, Fusion Auth, ChainGuard, Graylog, Cowbell, and more raise funding. What does security actually mean? The changing world of security exits? 6 questions every board should ask its CISO, meta-analysis of the top MITRE attack techniques, lessons from the SEC's lawsuit against SolarWinds, all that and more in this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. Cyber threats target digital identities. Do you know who or what is accessing your company's apps, systems, and data? You need to know who's there, who to let in, and who to keep out. And you'll need more than access management to stay secure. You need SailPoint Identity Security. As the leader in identity security, SailPoint can help mature your security resilience while driving efficiencies and compliance for your organization. Start your identity journey with SailPoint's free maturity assessment. Go to securityweekly.com/SailPoint to get your free identity security assessment today. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy Chaos Never Dies Day. This is episode 339, recorded on Thursday, November 9th, 2023. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is the Czar of Zero Trust, the captain of content, Katie Teitler. How you doing, Katie?
I'm fine. I would say we're about to create some chaos, but that's just not true. We're just not that chaotic over here. Oh, well, you might be. You might be. Okay, that's fair. Happy Chaos Day to you too, Adrian.
Yeah, and it's I think it's a lot of fun that we're going to talk about that today, because with our second interview, Kelly Shortridge authored the book Security Chaos Engineering. So it seems very appropriate that just happens to be one of the many silly national, international days that's been declared on today.
Well, I will bring up for everybody listening, if you're listening on November 9th, and November 10th is National Vanilla Cupcake Day, and that is very important to me personally. So I hope you all indulge.
We've got room to celebrate more than one thing. I think we can do that, right?
We can.
In fact, that would go right along with it being Chaos Never Dies Day, is celebrating many, many things on this day, not just one. All right, quick announcement here. You can join our Discord channel, which I am staring at right now, to chat with our hosts, ask questions, customize live stream alerts, and more. Visit securityweekly.com/Discord to receive an invite. And yeah, just pop in there, say hello. You can ask questions during the live show, or you can just pop in there whenever and ask questions whenever. We do look at that channel. All right, so for today's first interview, the topic is Internet attack surface. We're excited to have Aidan Holland, who is a software engineer at Censys, with us today, and he's done a lot of cool stuff there. He played pivotal roles in the creation of the Censys search engine and Censys Python SDK. He also led development of the Censys Cloud Connector and was at the helm of the groundbreaking Censys GPT project. Welcome, Aidan.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on for this one. So this is a really interesting one for me. So I've actually worked on projects back when Mirai came out. That's when I took my first stab at scanning the entire internet myself, because I found a lot of the details I was looking for on that botnet I couldn't really find. And then, after I figured out how to do that without getting sued or kicked off DigitalOcean, where I was doing my scanning from, I used that in a few other projects. But I think it's a good place to start with what we're talking about here, with what Censys does. Like, I don't know. I think when most people say the public internet, in their mind, it's this, it's like saying the universe, right? Or like talking about how many stars are in the galaxy. It seems like this impossibly huge thing, but there are companies that scan the whole thing and analyze those results, right?
Certainly, yeah. Companies all over the place. Everyone thinks of Google as the main internet scanning company or the web search engine, but there's so much more information under the hood. Whether it's like TLS certificates, other services that are just not on 80 or 443. There's tons of extra stuff, and it's really interesting to be able to scan it. We see, obviously the entire IPv4 space, and then parts of the IPv6 space, which obviously we're not walking, but are vastly interesting to look at the data we do have for that.
Yeah, and it was interesting. I think that mainly started out as like a research project for some folks. I think even Censys itself maybe started out as a university project. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah. We're out of University of Michigan and originally started as ZMAP, which is play on Nmap here. But we took that and scaled it into a full internet scanning company, and then we built an attack surface management platform on top of that data.
Yeah, and I remember playing with that tool. That was one of the tools that I was playing with back in the day, and it's so maybe some context around this, like how many IPv4 addresses do you have to scan to do this, and how long does it generally take to do a scan of the internet?
Absolutely. So we're actually able to hit each IPv4 address every 4 minutes, not on every port. It takes a full day to do a full port scan for all 65K ports. But we actually see about 240 million IPv4 addresses and 150 million IPv6 addresses. So less visibility into the IPv6 space, but we do that based off of Quad A records. So it's a little easier than walking the entire space.
Right, and that's just because the possible IPv6 space is so incredibly huge, right?
Most certainly, yeah. It's if you look at, there's some pretty good charts, such as like the Hilbert curve. You can see which portions of it are kind of allocated for public use. It's about 3/4 of the IPv6 space that you can actually find yourself having an address for. But it is quite difficult to get that fully walked. I think it's what is it? 8 to the, I think it's 16th addresses. It's an insane quantity.
Yeah. Well, and that was kind of the point, right? Is IPv4 exhaustion. We were running out of possible addresses. They were getting expensive. So, yeah, we needed something that scaled much, much larger.
Most certainly. And it certainly worked. We're seeing a lot more people kind of switch to IPv6. But not as much as classic IPv4, which standard cloud providers are still using for almost all of their containers and Elastics with containers and such. So,
we mentioned it started as a research project, turned into a business. How do people use this generally? Like how do like the paid version of this? What are people actually using the platform for?
Certainly. So there's a couple different use cases we really cater for. There's a lot of researchers who actually use our data. Some of them are in the academic space doing things like what you are with looking at Mahari and other C2s and other threat actors. There's also just people who are interested in what type of TLS ciphers people are using, getting statistics on that. When there's new breaches and things that come out, it's really interesting to be able to go out and say, hey, show me all of those products that are out there that are, either running that software or are vulnerable to a new CVE. Those are our two largest use cases for search. There's definitely other use cases where it's, monitoring your own attack surface from the external perspective. So if you wanted to check your domain, you wanted to check your IPs, you can go through and do that. It's a little easier to do with more of an automated tool. But for search, it's mostly exploration or for research purposes.
And then the actual depth of the data that you get, right? Like it's more than just, hey, port 139 is open to the public internet or port 23. I imagine you're also capturing banners and things like that. Like how deep can you go and not get yourself in trouble, right? Can you attempt to log into things with default credentials so you can determine whether.
Yeah, we do not do any credential trying any default credentials. So it's purely from a unauthenticated perspective. So we do capture banners. We do capture the chain for the cipher. We also capture the TLS key itself. And we also have a lot of information we're able to add to that, whether it's about the autonomous system, the location, the ASN block you're in. You're also able to see a whole bunch about the software that able to identify, specifically on HTTP. We have a bunch of other, services that we scan for, such as like Cobalt Strike, which is one that I'm pretty interested in at the moment. But we're also able to add things like JARM, JA3, all of that type of stuff. We're able to enrich the initial data. So it's pretty interesting to be able to see and be able to do analysis on those patterns across like several hosts. It's rather fascinating.
Right, in JA3, you're talking about fingerprinting some of these services, right?
Certainly, yeah. So we do have things like banner hashes, but when it comes to TLS, and personally, I follow a lot of like C2s. They're not going to advertise themselves, especially if they do practice good OPSEC. So a lot of them will be hidden behind a combination of JARM or JA3, or hopefully in the future JA4. But it's kind of hidden in these fields that are not abundantly apparent to the average scanner or the average user.
Yeah, so I think the thing that was really fascinating here, again, back to the Mirai example, the Mirai botnet could have been built at any point in time. It could have been built in 2012 and 2014. It just happened to pop up in, I think it was 2016 that it was assembled, that people just realized, hey, there's all this stuff connected to the public internet. I can reach out, I can touch it. It has default credentials. What if I just took control of all that stuff and, pulled it into one giant machine? So, yeah, ever since then, I think that kind of captured the imagination, and a lot of researchers started really looking harder at this data and saying, okay, what's the next Mirai, right? Like, what's the next, group of thousands of low-hanging fruit that could be, exploited for whatever kind of profit. Go ahead.
See some of it related to specifically MoveIt and some of these other like mass file transfer services. People generally don't secure those on their home networks as well as they should. But we are seeing a lot of C2s and botnets kind of spin up in that realm. But similar to the Mirai, that people generally target things like printers and other vulnerable devices that aren't made with the OPSEC in mind.
Yeah, and I think there's a legacy version of Confluence out there. Seeing some stats on that I assume came from a service like yours, where there's still like thousands of people running their own, this on-prem version of Confluence that's vulnerable.
Certainly, yeah, we were actually tracking that within the last couple of weeks. It's been fascinating to see, because we're actually able to tell this explicit version depending on the banners that are provided, or the things like the CSV or the CSS files that are linked in the HTTP bodies. We're able to detect the version based off of that and see who's doing on-prem.
Yeah. So now that we've kind of laid the foundation for what kind of data you're gathering, some of the basic things that you can do with it, maybe let's jump into, kind of what kind of changes have you seen with what's available on the public internet today? What are some of the trends that you've seen with this data over time? I know certainly, in the last I'd say 10 or 15 years, that there was like one of the big pivotal moments was from 80 to 443, right? Was the push to get everything, especially when Google started downranking anybody that wasn't using encryption. I think that was the big final push, and all of a sudden, we saw telecoms complaining that they couldn't add value-add services because they couldn't read the actual data being sent across the internet because everything was encrypted now. Have you seen any other interesting trends as you work with this data?
Yeah, certainly. A couple come to mind. First off is TLS. cipher selection. It's a very interesting process, but nowadays there's only about 2 or 3, maybe 4 if you're really looking at it, of shared ciphers that are across multiple platforms, multiple servers. But we're actually able to see which ciphers are being used and which is the default cipher for all of the IPv4 addresses that have 443 or any TLS enabled for any of the services. So we've been seeing movement there. We've also been seeing movement, at least in the threat hunting community, of them trying to hide their C2s a little bit better. Definitely, before everyone would just broadcast like, I'm such and such C2 server, like in the server header, which was a little ridiculous, but they've been moving away from it, from that side of things. But we've also been seeing some new services kind of emerge. Recently started introducing IPP scanning, so quite literally printer scanning. So we've seen more of those come online in the recent years. Other things that have kind of stand out to me, we've had all sorts of really interesting services that we started to scan. We scanned SIP, stuff like that, and it just boggles my mind what people leave on the internet. It's like the Shodan Safari or whatever it is. It's constantly changing and constantly quite interesting. But in terms of other trends, nothing really comes to mind out of the ordinary, outside of just how long it takes people to kind of react after some of these 0 days or CVEs come out. We're actually able to monitor like that, the rollout of patches. The other thing I've kind of noticed is after a CVE comes out, people actually spin up more of that vulnerable service, whether it's a honeypot or if they're trying to replicate it themselves. It propagates more. Yeah.
That makes sense, right? People want to capture a copy of the exploit, see what the attack looks like, maybe gather the, make a list of the IP addresses. But yeah, that's happened in the past. Like people would report on, there's this many vulnerable versions out there. And I'd always ask, but how many of those are just security companies with honeypots or security programs, luring people in versus actual vulnerable instances?
Certainly. And in some cases, we're able to tell. We've been kind of tracking this recent wave of honeypots that have been spun up on seemingly Amazon ASNs. But we've been calling them kind of tar pits, and they're made for internet scanners. So it's based on like software identification and server headers, and it tries to get internet scanners to identify as many possible different versions to attract specific hackers to specific pieces of it. So it's been interesting to see it, but yeah, we're definitely working on the honeypot identification side of things. And it's immensely fascinating to see what people try to attract specifically. Also from the other side of it, like Gray Noise has been, tracking the receiving side or the exploiting side of it. And it's quite fascinating.
Right. Because I mean, it's such a, the whole security scorecard space, bunch of insurance companies now, like there's so many parties scanning the whole internet now that you kind of do need, the Gray Noise makes sense. You need somebody in that position to say, you don't have to worry about this. Maybe you should worry about this, kind of to the name of it, separate the noise from the signal there. What's benign, I think in their terminology versus not benign.
Absolutely. It also has a pretty interesting couple of fields that we use from Censys's perspective. Obviously, Gray Noise identifies Censys quite frequently, but we can also identify people trying to spoof Censys or spoof other scanners. Many people will pretend to be Shodan or Censys when doing mass exploitation. Yeah. There's a spoofable field in Gray Noise that is always piques my interest.
Yeah, I mean, you can set the user agent to whatever you want, right? You can you can pretend to be the Google scanning bot, right?
Absolutely, yeah. But you'll know pretty quickly, depending when it starts hitting random paths and it's trying to guess random environmental paths and other stuff. It's like I don't think Google is trying to brute force my admin panel.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Behavior, in other words.
Certainly.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's Well, so that brings up an interesting question talking about gray noise. One of the things I noticed scanning the whole internet is that a lot of people don't like to be scanned, and you'll get abuse notices. And so I had to build out my exclusion list from that. So I wonder, like, do you have a sense for how large a chunk of the internet you're generally not allowed to scan? And how big of an issue is that? Like, if I'm the bad guys and I have a set of IPs, can I just request everybody not scan me? Or are they just mostly using, throwaway, VPSs and IP addresses from Amazon, Alibaba Cloud, whatever?
Yeah, often we do see it from the VPS providers, DigitalOcean and such. That's what I've been tracking most of our C2s recently. But when it comes to exclusion lists, at Censys, we actually do respect and follow those. But in terms of the greater percentage of the internet that we do not scan, it's close to like 0.03%. So it's a really small subset. Most of it's universities and such like that just don't want us touching their stuff. But most people, our scans are non-intrusive, and we don't do any path traversal or anything like that. So it's a pretty low effort in that front. But people do definitely have some strong opinions when it comes to that.
Yeah. So we mentioned. Oh, go ahead, Katie.
Oh no, you go ahead. I'll follow up.
Well, I was about. You might as well. I was about to switch gears anyway.
Okay. I was going to, go back a little bit to, talking about honeypots and, how this intersects, people not wanting you to scan their assets in the external attack surface. How are companies dealing with the plethora of information they get? Because, you said it at the beginning of this interview, the amount of data that they can get is so overwhelming. And there has to be a way for them to manage it, to triage it, to understand not just where their vulnerabilities are, but where their downstream vulnerabilities are, what the so-called blast radius is. So how's the average company dealing with it? Because right now, so much data, probably not enough people in the majority of security programs.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing that comes to mind there is, from Censys perspective, we have the attack surface management product, which helps us prioritize those risks for the users. We flag different common things that we see. We flag different CVEs as they come out. We have a wonderful rapid response team that's able to crank out some pretty interesting fingerprints as these vulnerabilities or 0 days are released. But for the sheer quantity of information, there's definitely a sense of alert fatigue. That is definitely not going to go away anytime soon, especially with some of the recent 0 days we've been seeing. But it really comes down to prioritizing that blast radius exactly. So trying to figure out what assets are most publicly exposed or have the most vulnerable applications, and kind of focusing there, working with their different teams to prioritize that. But it's definitely a struggle we see for our customers and companies as a whole.
So in following on that, in terms of prioritization, you said that the tool can help prioritize, and obviously that's really important as well. But what about customization per company? Because it's one thing for you to be able to recommend something, and another thing for an organization to prioritize their own risk. So how much flexibility or customization can a customer get?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great question. So for our ASM product, you can actually customize the severity of any risk in our platform. So the one that we see a lot is FTP. So for certain banks and certain other financial institutions, they have to use FTP actually to submit payroll requests. So FTP is an accepted risk they have, and there's a certain set of standards that they have for securing them. But in our platform, we do label having an FTP service exposed as a medium risk, which for the average company is in fact a medium risk, but it is an accepted risk that they can set to low or ignore within our platform.
How about exploitability? Because vulnerability is one thing, exploitability is a whole other game.
Certainly. So For the exploitability, we don't attempt any exploits. Being from the third party perspective, it's really important to us that we don't try to execute any of these. So in some cases, we're able to have the exploitability based on software versions or things like that, but we don't truly have a exploitability field or a way to do it. Oftentimes, we can suggest remediation or ways to check if it is exploitable for the company itself, but we don't attempt to do that from our side.
And when you're talking about honeypots and, setting up those capabilities and looking for those, I know you can't reveal a lot, but what are some of the more interesting attempts that you've seen in the last year, especially as we've come into sort of this newer world of this hybrid work from anywhere? I have my printer over here connected to my computer, which is connected to my corporate network. You have all of this stuff connected, but it's not, it moves all the time. Everything is ephemeral, because I could be working from here today, and then tomorrow I could be working from a completely different location, a coffee shop, a different state, whatever it may be. And so that makes exposure really hard. So, what are some best practices? What kinds of things have you seen that are cropping up as trends in terms of findings?
Yeah, certainly. So a couple things come to mind, at least in the home network side of things. We do have a version of our product we call Henry, HNRI, home network resource information, or I'm forgetting the acronym off the top of my head here. But it does allow companies to add their employees' IPs to make sure that they don't have any ports or anything forwarded on their home network. As just a general tip, don't open ports on your network, or specifically your router, unless you know exactly what you're doing and are able to ensure that it is secure. Oftentimes you'll see printers pop up. Every once in a while we'll see some kid spinning up a Minecraft server on their parents' network, and it's like, no, please don't open that to the network. Things like that are definitely opening yourself up to further attacks. But in terms of findings and honeypots, I've seen a couple interesting things. I'll link the article to the tar pits, but there's also some interesting stuff going around with, they call it gas pot. There's a protocol called ATG, Automatic Tank Gauge, and it's really fascinating. People have spun up honeypots for the automated tank gauge protocol, so they're able to see who's trying to exploit gas stations specifically. That's been pretty interesting. There's also things like MadPot that I would definitely check out. But the ephemerality of assets is something that we are continuously trying to address, especially when it comes to cloud, and spinning up EC2s and having those be ephemeral. It's a really difficult problem to try to address.
So gas station exploitability, that is definitely a first for me. Are you talking about how attackers are potentially trying to attack the point of sale systems?
So it's not necessarily point of sale systems. It actually is the tanks themselves. There's an emergency shutoff feature on it, and it's most certainly should be protected by a password. But most of the time, it is just set up by some random company and then put on the internet to be monitored from afar. But it has the ability to check the levels of the tanks, turn off the tanks, it set the prices, all that type of stuff is done through this
and that's
software.
Regulated. They're required to run that, I'm pretty sure. Yeah,
in certain states they are. So it's pretty interesting to see. But yeah, I linked the honeypot down below here. But it's surprising how many you can find that are legitimate and that are these honeypots.
That's by Stephen Hilt. He's down in Chattanooga. He's part of our local East Tennessee InfoSec community.
Small world.
Small world. Sorry, Katie.
No, go ahead. I'm just. You sent me a screenshot, and I'm looking at it, going, I would be a terrible attacker, because it would never occur to me to want to look for something like that. It just wouldn't.
Yeah, funnily enough, it's a telnet interface. It's a plain telnet interface, and just with some special characters that are publicly accessible. There's the commands are highly documented. You can do some real strange things with it, let alone people connecting other devices that are probably risky, especially from the enterprise perspective. People putting up unexposed or unprotected cameras, things like that. We try to be very sensitive about how we, approach these type of fields. But it is immensely interesting what you find on those similar networks.
Yeah, it was always. I used to follow some folks, back when Twitter was more active with InfoSec, who would just do this, who would just get bored and search the internet for weird stuff. Like they, write a script that would just screenshot VNC, right? And you get stuff like this. You'd get water treatment plants. You get breweries. These different like boiler control systems and things like that. Look like they're running on Windows 95. Yeah, it's amazing. I used to be a PCI QSA, and one of my clients once was a very large gas station travel center company, and yeah, they did have the network segmented, where like the stuff that the government needed to be able to connect to check how much fuel they had on hand, that kind of stuff was completely segmented on their local networks. But yeah, it wasn't really part of the audit because there's no payment data there. But I always wondered, like, are they, connecting via VPN access these? Or are they just on the public internet? Like, how are they getting into this stuff? And it was just a lot of weird specialized stuff. And I'm sure it's not just the oil and gas industry. I'm sure other industries have weird telnet protocol legacy stuff like this.
Quite certainly, yeah. And speaking of the water and gas industry, one that comes to mind is obviously the Colonial Pipeline hack from a couple of years ago, and that was exclusively done via a VPN client or a VPN server that they had on one of their networks that they were able to pivot through. We see things like that a lot, or people spinning up things like AnyConnect or RDP on things that are obviously not meant to be exposed. Like, for example, once I found an X-ray machine that had an RDP server on it, and it was like, why is this happening?
Probably for support.
There has to be HIPAA coming in there.
Yeah, so I imagine it's support, right? Like the whole Okta thing with the HAR files. Like there's a certain level of access you have to have and convenience that has to be there to be able to troubleshoot people's issues, right? And so, that whole Okta thing happened just because people weren't scrubbing creds out of their HAR files that they were uploading to the support site. So I imagine that's where a lot of this remote access stuff comes from, is either, the people supporting it are like a third party, like it's a managed service, or it's the vendor themselves. Part of the contract is probably they require access into those systems. Back in the day, it used to be dial-up modems. I imagine there's still probably some dial-up modems out there, but that eventually turned into VNC and RDP and stuff like that, I imagine.
Yeah. No, and funnily enough, we still do see some things like, for example, ham radio controllers. We still see a couple Windows 5 devices that are running ham controllers, things like that. It's all sorts of these legacy protocols. We see things like, if you've seen FlightAware, there's some of these open source Wi-Fi or like radio antennas that monitor airplanes that are just littered across the internet because the people just set up little Raspberry Pis, hook them up to 5G hotspots, and then open all the ports and don't even think about it. And it's really scary. These are open source pieces of software that if you have the ability to, you can look into it and make sure they're doing a couple things right. But there's no way you can prevent everything and anything exploitable. So it's really just trying to limit what is connected to the internet and what it has access to on your internal network as well.
Yeah, I imagine you can find airplanes, boats, satellites on Censys.
Certainly. I've definitely found a couple submarine controllers, which are pretty interesting. They were for subnautical research. So you could monitor the different little drones and things like that. And mind you, no default password, no nothing, just like the index page directly. Didn't even have to look for any paths or anything. All sorts of stuff's out there, and it's really fascinating and a little terrifying. It makes me want to kind of check myself frequently. If anyone's listening and wants to give a check of their own thing, we do have this little tool. It's called me.census.io. it automatically pulls up your current IP and checks it against Censys just to see if we see anything for it. So there's a couple interesting tools like that out there. But it's pretty shocking what people decide to connect to the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've got a little device called a Fingbox that I put on my network, and that's one of the many things it does. Is it notifies me if I suddenly open any ports to the public internet.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I used to use a Ping, and the pie holes are pretty good, especially if you're routing your DHCP and everything through there. You can block any outgoing or ingoing traffic. Regardless of working for an internet scanning company, the first thing I do anytime I set up a network is I block all the scanners as soon as I possibly am able. Because while it's a good thing to have it scanned, I still, I can run the scans myself and not worry about external, malicious actors attempting to compromise my internal network.
Yeah, so you mentioned, or I mentioned in the intro, Censys GPT. So what's the idea behind that? I imagine it's still leveraging the same data that you've got, just like you're experimenting with the front end, right? Like different ways of finding what you're looking for.
Yeah, so it doesn't actually use any of our data directly. We at Censys, we have a DSL, a domain-specific language that we use for searching all of our fields. We have about, I think it's over 1,000 fields at the moment, and I can't remember exactly, the name of every field every time I want it. So it's just a really quick way of being able to type in English and get out a DSL query to help you find exactly what you're finding. So you can type something in like, show me all Russian hosts that are running RDP or FTP, and then it will spit out the DSL equivalent and open it and search for you to help you.
I understand. So this would be super useful with, like I imagine security teams, like you're using Velociraptor, you're using, Elastic, you're using all these different tools, and each of them have their own schemas. OS query, they have their own query language. And it's, I imagine people in SOCs and IR folks must have just like dozens of cheat sheets just hanging up all around them, or somewhere where they can easily access them. So this you just say in plain index, here's what I want to do, and it spits out the specific language.
Exactly. Yeah. So it also takes things in like Shodan queries or Zumai queries. We know that there's a lot of different syntaxes out there, and it can be a headache to learn all of them. It's taken me a couple of years to get just my head around a couple of them. So I tried to kind of embed that into a model that would then be able to translate the content. So, you type something in like http.html, like the Shodan version, and it translates it to services.http.response.body for the more specific DSL that we have. So it allows you to request things that are more specific, but it is a little bit more verbose. So definitely more towards the research crowd there.
Yeah, very cool. I can see how that would save a ton of time. So, talking more about some of the community stuff you're doing, I imagine Censys is still supporting ZMAP and still uses it.
So part of it. So our founder Zakir, which is aptly named for ZMAP, Z, and he and the team do maintain the open source ZMAP project, but we do use modified versions of it on our side. In terms of this other community work, we've recently been doing a whole push for open source technologies and different prototypes. We launched something called the Censys Workshop, which is just a series of open source GitHub projects that we are trying to push and trying to move forward different ways to access our data. But for the community portion, it's also really important for me personally to engage with different researchers. I personally really enjoy speaking with the threat hunting crowd. So tracking these new bots that come out, new C2s. Like recently, I've been looking at PikaBot, stuff like that. It's and also Darkgate is the other one that comes to mind. So as those come out, we try to integrate it into our scanners so we can mass identify them to report them to entities like ThreatFox or VirusTotal, or if they are running on Cloudflare, we try to report it through that way. But it's trying to cut down on some of this propagation of malware.
So just kind of personally curious, like how much of your time do you spend working on actual product features and things like that versus community research and stuff like that? Like, how is your role split up?
Certainly. So my role specifically, I'm a software engineer. So I'm going to be working on our new search product here shortly. But most of it is related to, I'd say about 3/4 of my time is product features or upgrades and bug fixes, that variety. And then the other quarter of my time I spend doing, researching or fingerprinting C2s, or recently I've been taking a look at different malware samples to see if I can track the connections that are outgoing from it. We've also been looking at things like DNS-CAT and other kind of versions of exfil data. But it's been pretty interesting. That's generally how I split my time, depending on, if something comes out like a new Picobot or new Darkgate, like I might spend a little bit more time trying to get that fingerprinted so we have the scanning infrastructure sets up, because it does take a day or so to propagate and scan the full internet. So we want to make sure we jump on those, but most of my time is in the product engineering side of things.
Gotcha. Anything else interesting you want to share? That you're working on, writing about, events or anything like that coming up that you want to share before we wrap up here?
Certainly, I can share a couple things. I'll link it down in the Discord here. We recently created a map of the entire IPv4 space using a Hilbert curve, which I mentioned before, but it's a single image which represents the entire IPv4 space. So that's pretty interesting. You can zoom in on that. And then next week, we also have a threat hunting workshop that we're running in DC. And that's going to be kind of tracking down some of these C2s and kind of learning how to fingerprint them and how to kind of formulate and report these. But definitely want to make sure we're promoting that. And but yeah, I think other than that, there's just continually interesting things coming out as these 0 days kind of get published, and we figure out how to fingerprint them and how to track them down and how to identify our customers, but also identify the greater internet. Honestly, most people won't even know that they're hacked until after the fact. Like we've been following the SysAid stuff pretty closely. People are spinning up all sorts of things that are kind of questionable. So it's definitely always interesting. There's never a slow day.
I don't know if you guys have a merch store, but a poster of this would be pretty cool.
Yeah, right. I would love that, honestly. And also, I don't know if you noticed at the top, there's a high resolution version, which will take a moment, but it certainly looks quite cool. It's about a 50 megabyte image back there. So it takes a second, but I definitely think it's worth it.
Oh, yeah. No, I missed the link to that somewhere here. All right. Well, excellent stuff. Thank you so much for joining us today, Aidan. This was really great.
This was wonderful. Much appreciated.
All right. And don't go anywhere. When we come back, we're going to talk chaos and industry alignment with Kelly Shortridge, the author of the book Security Chaos Engineering. If your organization is ready to embrace edge computing, we have good news. The 2023 AT&T Cybersecurity Insights Report provides everything you need to know to get started. In the report, we identify the common characteristics of edge computing. We found edge use cases are rapidly coming online, and we reveal how to secure edge computing. Most importantly, you'll learn how to prepare for your edge ecosystem. Get your complimentary copy of the report today. Visit securityweekly.com/ATT cybersecurity. That's securityweekly.com/ATT cybersecurity. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Follow us on Twitter for live stream reminders, highlighted clips, memes, and more. You can find us at SEC Weekly, SEC Weekly. All right, for our second interview today, Kelly Shortridge joins us to talk about chaos, failure, and why InfoSec continues to struggle. Kelly Shortridge is a senior principal in the office of the CTO at Fastly. She's a prolific writer and speaker in security with dozens, if not hundreds, of interesting essays and talks to her name that you can go check out either on her website or on YouTube somewhere. She's an expert on resilience in complex software systems, which is kind of at the core of a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about today. And also wrote a very thought-provoking book on resilience called Security Chaos Engineering, which is also going to work its way into our conversation today. Welcome to the show, Kelly.
Thank you for having me, Adrian. Always a pleasure.
Likewise. I didn't even mention decision trees. Maybe we'll get to that as well. You do, and we were talking about this in the prep call. I'm just impressed with both your output, the quality of the output and the quantity. And I wish I could do half the number of things that you're doing.
As I joke, I'm a total hermit. Like, what's fun for me is like digging into like 500 academic research papers over a weekend, and then coming up with a bunch of ideas coming out of that, which could be anywhere from like 5 to 10 blog posts or a book. Or a like 140,000 word book. So.
Yeah. And you seem to, which I think I can really, it's similar for me, just taking these ideas, throwing them out there and getting feedback on them. So do you enjoy that process as well? Just the process of, hey, here's an idea, after reading those, however many research papers, putting together a blog post, putting it out there. You're really eager to see what comes back from some of that or from some of your talks?
For sure. I mean, I love inspiring people. I've been incredibly flattered and honored that I've heard some organizations actually base a lot of their security strategy on my work, even going back to like 2017 with behavioral game theory stuff. And that's obviously extremely fulfilling. I think there are a lot of my more philosophical essays and content that gets people thinking in new ways. And they say that they completely change their perspective and their mindset. And that's also very rewarding. But to be honest, a lot of what I do is just for my own amusement in a very like Vonnegut sense. Like I recently published an essay that's quite long on the etymology of the word security and what it can tell us about modern security. I didn't really expect people to read like a 30-minute essay for the most part. Like people, have stuff to do. But I had a blast researching it and writing it. I even wrote like a Socratic dialogue. So it's a mixture of like, I actually want to influence things for the better. Like everybody is struggling across software engineering and cybersecurity with resilience and security challenges. Like, how can I make kind of this indelible mark on the industry and make the world better in my own way? Then the other part of it is definitely like just how to have fun with life, right?
Right. And reading your writing is you can tell you're having fun with it, because the reader has fun with it also. And there's this art that you embrace. I've seen a few people embrace the art of the footnote, where you can just go down this whole rabbit hole with the footnotes on some of your posts. And it's a lot of fun that you take the time to include all that stuff.
Well, I'm an avid footnote reader, so I like to view it as like little Easter eggs, like a reward for you being a fellow footnote reader, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, it's interesting. Some of the things you noted there, like changing how we think. Security has a lot of baggage. A lot of security kind of grew out of technical roles. And it's interesting. As we evolved, I used to say years ago that the whole agile DevOps movement did more for security than any actual security people ever did, just by changing kind of the table stakes, changing the the different pieces of the formula that we have to work with. Like all of a sudden, if a workflow can be ephemeral, like that just changes the whole game. Which is something that would have never occurred to somebody thinking purely in security terms. But yeah, we kind of come with a lot of baggage. So I'm kind of curious. I just want to touch a little bit on because your background is in finance. And I want to touch on some of your impressions as you came into security at the time that you did. I don't know if it just.
Yeah, so my original background is more like behavioral economics as far as what I studied in school, which is all about how humans make decisions and especially the supposed rationality of those decisions. I think rationality is a fraught term. We can get into that if you want. But what I definitely noticed is that there was a lot of market inefficiencies. There was a lot of very confusing dynamics. It was very clearly not really based on ROI. It was a lot more like feels than reals. To speak, there was a lot of herding behavior. There's a lot of, like chasing the shiny because it makes you feel cool and important. Obviously, the social dynamics between software engineers and cybersecurity teams, or software engineering teams and cybersecurity teams. I noticed a lot of resentment kind of in the cybersecurity world at the time. It was cybersecurity leaders like CISOs being like, the cloud is dangerous. Like I can secure my servers better than Amazon, which I think everybody now realizes is a joke. But I was there and I remember that was the majority opinion in cybersecurity. And obviously they lost that battle. And I think it's good that they did. So that was kind of the world I went into where I was like, wow, this industry's a mess. I think I can actually make a difference, which was a bit naive. But I feel like eventually I kind of got there, at least how companies kind of rely on my expertise now. But it started out with pointing out kind of those biases, especially around prospect theory, where losses feel harder than gains for humans. They feel like twice as bad as gains, and just showing that you can almost see almost like the gambler's fallacy of like, oh, I need to get out of the hole once I've lost a lot of money. So I have to make bigger bets almost. You get desperate, and showing how that translated into cybersecurity. That was kind of the start of things. And since then, I did a lot of like, here's the problem space. And I had people rightfully being like, okay, so what do we do instead? And I would talk about that kind of piecemeal. But the book is basically a culmination of people who are like, well, what do we do instead? Okay, so our strategy's bad in theory, Kelly. Like you're kind of like crapping all over it. Fine. What should we do? And the book is basically my like, here's what you do. Like, here's a bunch of things to think about, a bunch of like opportunities and practices. So we'll see, again, in some sense, software engineering teams are more excited about some of this stuff than cybersecurity teams. See the prior history with CISOs being fearful of the cloud and fearful of change. But I think, the way forward, like you said, is not with what we know today. A lot of it is not going to be found in a vendor hall or in a bolt-on tool, certainly not in like AI or LLMs. A lot of it is just like adopting, like you said, DevOps practices and other technologies that enable like reliability benefits that also have these ancillary cybersecurity benefits. But you have to have a more open mind. And that's a lot of what I try to do is like, how do we open the industry's mind to these new opportunities?
Well, you know what they say, the cloud is just someone else's computer, man, right? Like those stickers still exist on people's laptops. Yeah. But it's astounding to me, some of the stuff we've seen in the last couple of years, like, an entire exchange hosting business going out the window. All in a matter of weeks, because even a company that specialized in hosting Microsoft Exchange servers still couldn't do it well enough to not have the entire thing disrupted. But it's I wonder how much people are pointing their finger at Microsoft's the never-ending train of Azure issues, as evidence for why they should run their own stuff. And then we've got some almost regressive stuff where Basecamp is quitting the cloud and
that's because well, I mean, there's a very obvious self-interest there, right? Right. Like Ruby on Rails kind of thrives on things not being cloud, so it makes sense. don't know.
Right.
Yeah. There's a bias.
Well, I'm sure they're saving some money, but the other side of that is they never went pure cloud anyway, so they never kind of lost the skill set of running their own stuff. So yeah, sure, fine. Maybe that works for them because they're only using 3 or 4 Amazon services. They don't have large Lambda workloads, I imagine. Like some of that stuff, like it's not even comparable anymore. A lot of the services that exist in cloud. I'm not sure there are on-prem equivalents or, at what scale it makes sense to even attempt that.
Yeah, I think Oxide is a new one that gives kind of the equivalent of like on-prem, but still with your cloud kind of dev workflows. Big fan of what they've been doing there. I feel like things ping pong sometimes. I personally think the Basecamp thing is kind of an isolated incident. It's a fight probably that he'll lose, to be honest. The thing is, like, hybrid, I think is the most likely, especially for large organizations. But for small organizations, cloud just makes sense. Like, don't hire, like, you have some sort of business, and that business is not managing servers, right? And so if you want to succeed in your business and differentiate in your market, whatever capital you have to spend on headcount, like, you should dedicate that to whatever expertise makes sense for your business and outsource, the hard thinky things to the people who are experts, right? So I think Basecamp is maybe an exception in that regard, but certainly your typical, retail company or basically any other industry other than tech, I think it's not feasible to move back away from the cloud. I do think the shift away from microservices, that's kind of a different trend. And I personally think that's because what people ultimately wanted to achieve with microservices was modularity. But it's pretty easy to not get modularity with microservices, and you just get kind of like a complexity spaghetti mess, which isn't great. And you have higher overhead costs in terms of like network transport. So there are definitely downsides there. So I can understand the moving back, trying to adopt a modular monolith more than moving away from cloud. And it's not something I'm even seeing. If anything, I'm just seeing more and more cloud adoption. So.
Yeah, and kind of going back to my example of DevOps doing more for security than I think we ever have directly. Resilience is a big piece of that. I've been in charge of disaster recovery and business continuity before, and I've seen just old school plans where we're going to recover databases from tapes, and then all the way into high availability. What it looked like in the old school, what it looked like in the new school. I worked with clients that actually threw the switch for 1 week, and this was a retail company, to their DR environment, ran off of DR for 1 week every quarter, and then threw the switch back. And that was in the old school way of doing things. That was the most impressive case I've ever seen, but it's the only one I know of. And it's the only time I ever saw it. So that seemed much more the exception than the rule. In most cases, people have no idea what would happen if they had to use their DR plan until it happens. And of course, what I used to tell people is maybe you've gotten 50% of it right. The other 50% of what's going to go wrong, you're going to find out at the moment you throw that switch.
Absolutely, yeah. The rule of complex systems and of just like life. The universe is to expect the unexpected. There are going to be surprises. We can never hope to mentally model the system completely. There are too many variables. It's just impossible. So yeah, that's something where, again, when I talk a lot about resilience, in some sense, there's the most receptive audience is actually SREs, site reliability engineers, because like you said, they're very focused on, just laser focused on things like availability, or I would call reliability in general, which is, to me, is made up of performance, availability, and correctness. Like, does the service work as intended? And so they're very laser focused on those things, which naturally means they're already doing a lot of things for resilience that also helps with cybersecurity. And they love hearing like, oh, we just have to think maybe a little differently or extend things in a particular way to cover, things like denial of service attacks. And certainly if you think about correctness in terms of, again, is a system or service behaving as intended? If an attacker is abusing an API, that's obviously not as intended, right? So you can see how their mandate could encompass cybersecurity. And they are so clever. All of my SRE friends, I'm always just amazed like how like MacGyver-y they are with systems. It's fantastic. And they also often care a lot about observability in a way that I think cybersecurity has not been able to catch up to be perfectly honest. Their data pipelines seem to be, even if messy, a bit stronger. And what I also see is there's often duplicate work between what like an SRE team or a platform engineering team is doing for observability, and what like a cybersecurity team is doing. But overwhelmingly, the platform engineering team is trying to build in resilience into the system, and they aren't quite as partial to like the bolts-on tools. Whereas the cybersecurity team, when I like consult or advise and just like talk to these companies, a lot of times the cybersecurity team is looking still for kind of that silver bullet, like what's going to be the perfect thing to defend us against all the things, right? And they've maybe ignored a lot of the like being able to change the system quickly, like being able to patch on demand, right? They've ignored being able, again, to like make sure, yeah, your logs are up and healthy and they aren't full of a bunch of BS, right? They're turning into like actionable metrics, or ignoring like, hey, like you said, maybe we can have more ephemeral services or immutable services that mean that the attacker just like can't persist. They can't, gain a shell on the system. Like there are all these things that, again, software engineers are already doing for reliability that often cybersecurity teams just don't know. And even sometimes when they're told, so this is getting to be a rambly answer, but I think it's important. I gave the same talk at Black Hat USA in 2019 as I did at Velocity, which was O'Reilly's conference around software engineering and platform engineering, especially in Berlin later that year in 2019. And Dr. Forsgren, who presented with me, Black Hat, can attest to this. There were people who apparently like walked out because they were so angry. We had such an angry Q&A after the Black Hat one. People were still at that time saying like the cloud is terrible for security. And they were very offended by the idea that security should adopt like DevOps principles and practices and, cooperate more and things like secure by design that I was talking about. At Velocity with, again, more SREs, software engineers, platform engineers, they loved it. They were like, oh my gosh, I now understand how like I can help cybersecurity. Like I can make a difference here. The attitude difference was it was miles apart. And I think, unfortunately, that's indicative of where we've seen things since 2019 headed, which is platform engineering slowly starting to eat more of the software security problem and cybersecurity teams increasingly getting cut out of that process.
This is all so interesting, and some of the things that you're saying have got me thinking about some things I've wondered but maybe not have said out loud for a really long time, which is how security comes at security. I think, and you can tell me if you agree with this, and then tell me how you would tackle this problem if you're addressing the market in a talk, in a book. But I think part of the issue with security is that security people love to operate in a little bit of a black box, right? Because there's sort of that, behind the curtain kind of attitude that helps security feel, no pun intended, more secure in their jobs. If people don't really understand what's going on, and if they're the ones who can hold the answers, that gives them more job security, that makes them not have to go too far outside of what they're doing. And I don't think anybody's doing it to be selfish. I just think that this is security. We don't necessarily either want or people don't understand what we're doing. And therefore that shift holds a lot of security people back, whereas developers, engineers are more focused on what they need to do the next day, the next week, the next month. And with your your psychology, behavioral background, is that something you see and something that the mindset, the chaos mindset helps when you're talking to, for instance, SREs versus security people who might want to walk out of a talk? Is it something that people should be thinking of, or am I totally off base and have just insulted a whole lot of people?
No, I mean, people are going to be insulted, right? That's my lived experience for my whole career is people are very angry, even if I'm like, listen, this is not something I even think you're consciously doing, because a lot of it is like humans subconsciously, like you said, like they want to protect themselves. They want to protect their livelihoods. Like there's psychological insecurity is a real thing, right? There's a reason why for corporate culture, everybody tries to aspire to psychological safety because that produces far better outcomes. And I think there is a very strong selection bias, especially with kind of like the old guard, shall we say, in cybersecurity, the ones that are currently at the leadership tier because they've risen up through the ranks, right, for many, many years. I think there is a selection bias where it takes a particular type of person definitely back in the day, to think about what could go wrong, right? There's a kind of hypervigilance that you need to have, which frankly, hypervigilance is just terrible for human nervous systems, and that accumulates over time. I think it is not an accident that we have like just probably way too many whiskey tastings and alcohol related things at these conferences, right? In a way that you don't see in other areas of tech. I'm just going to point that out there. I think there is kind of, in some sense, especially when I talk to security leaders, like I can empathize, because there is a kind of just very defeatist mindset and a very, like you said, insular, very insecure mindset of like, almost like they're worried they're going to be found out for being a fraud. And the SEC case pending notwithstanding, I think part of the problem is that the security industry, to be frank, has gotten away with not proving outcomes. You know, things like time to detect doesn't matter. That doesn't tell you anything about the system recovering or the impact to the business. Certainly things like percent of risk coverage, like that's meaningless. Reporting metrics like that, it's kind of not a wonder to me that we're often treated like a joke as an industry, again, being very honest. And sometimes you hear, well, we're trying to prove counterfactuals that we prevented something. It's not all that different to what SREs face, right? On the reliability side, they're trying to prevent downtime. And so there are a bunch of metrics that we can actually steal. I suggest a bunch in my book. Even some of the system signals we can steal from the SRE side. They should be our peers, because we're both, again, fighting that battle of like, we're trying to prevent or ideally recover from better some sort of bad thing happening in our systems, right? There should be that kinship, but yeah, you see very different cultures, and I think it's a problem. And I personally think there's a certain inflection point where the people with the more constructive mindset of like, you know what, failure will happen, but we can prepare for it. We can make sure that we recover, can make sure that we minimize impact. You know, we want to be builders. We want to make things easy for the employees in our organization, our users, the developers in our organization, make the secure way the easy way. There's that mindset. And then there's the mindset of like, you know, I am someone who implements tools and I kind of have my empire, and, you know, I get to feel special by being on the advisory board of a bunch of different startups doing things. And, you know, I don't have to really report success metrics because it's too hard. I don't actually think it's too hard. I think there's, again, there's kind of a collective like learned helplessness, and I think we can do better. And again, sometimes people get insulted by that, but to me, I'm actually saying like, I think you are capable of more. I think we as an industry are capable of much more. The question is, will we rise to the occasion? That's my very spicy / inspirational take on it.
No, I think that's great. And, you know, the $10,000 or $10 million question is, do you think as an industry we can get out of this groupthink attitude or this echo chamber of, oh gosh, we're up against everybody else, we've got this really hard thing to do? Because, you know, I've certainly seen it over the past 10, 15 or so years. It's very much this, oh, we're all in this together, but we're all in it as security alone. Is there some way to try to overcome it? I mean, obviously people like you are out there talking about it, but are there certain things that security people can embrace to actually change the mindset? Because it's the mindset, it's not the actual tools and technologies.
Yeah, definitely. I think a big thing is to start attending reliability conferences. That's like a very simple one. Like check out, you know, KubeCon's happening this week. I spoke there on Monday at the WebAssembly Day. Like just go see some of the talks there, especially the ones relating to like reliability, resilience, and start to brainstorm like, hey, you know what? We have a lot in common. They get burned out. They have to deal with incidents too, right? They have to be on call. Finding that kind of like mutual struggle, I think, is really valuable. I do see, like you said, a lot of times it is insular where, you know, the first time I saw a reference to infrastructure as code, other than when I talked about it, it's kind of like benefits to security. The only other time I saw it was that infrastructure as code, like shadow infrastructure as code, and how it's going to be so damaging to organization. Attackers are going to be all up in it. It's like, okay, but when I talked to some of the people espousing that, they couldn't tell me what infrastructure as code actually was, right? And I think one thing we're supposed to pride ourselves on in cybersecurity is being curious. I think we need to lean into that. We need to be curious about other team struggles. We need to be curious about the technologies they're using. Like an example I commonly give is like queues and message brokers can be amazing if there's a cybersecurity incident, because you can take a service offline, patch it up, redeploy it without disrupting the actual system operation, which is a really beautiful thing. But a lot of times security people don't know about message brokers and queues. But that's something they would learn very quickly. Again, kind of reaching out, learning more from that other area. I think there's way, if you allocate maybe 10% less of your time on like, here's the new shiny vulnerability or like this new APT report, how much is that actually helping your day-to-day, right? How is that actually helping your job other than that kind of FOMO and feeling like, oh, I'm in the know, therefore I'm doing stuff. It's like, well, is it actionable? Not really, for the most part. So allocate that 10% towards learning about these other things. Checking out some of the like platform engineering thought leaders and seeing what they're saying. They're on LinkedIn too, as well as Mastodon and all the million other social media platforms right now. So that's kind of my advice, is like lean into curiosity, that we're supposed to, feel confident in our curiosity. And, you really are not alone in many of your struggles. It's true, again, with reliability and resilience outside of cybersecurity. It's a lot of people are wrestling with this stuff. So, it's almost like stop resisting, because like people want to help. Every software engineer I've talked to, like they are never trying to do the insecure thing. I mean, there are always like a few people that are weird, but for the most part, they are eager to help. They just don't know how. And they certainly don't want things that are going to ruin like their own promotion cycle and bonuses and things like that, like very gatekeepy obstructionist thing. So yeah, that's my thing. Like reach out, learn from these other disciplines, like apply that curiosity. And whenever you hear a kind of like us versus them thing, really question like, okay, what information am I missing? Maybe I should talk to the people that are the supposed them to really understand their perspective as well. So, but to your point, I don't think it's hopeless. I don't think we're stuck like this forever. And I'm not the only one, luckily, saying a lot of this stuff anymore. There are a lot of like InfoSec thought leaders and even institutions like CISA talking about secure by design. So I'm hoping that ends up trickling down as well.
Yeah, I mean, we just have to play a little nicer in the sandbox with non-security people. There's obviously comfort in being around your peers who do what you do every day, who understand your job, who, feel the same joys and pains. But, I think that's a really astute point, that to be actually successful, you have to get out of that comfort zone. And a lot of it really is just comfort zone, I think.
Yeah. And I think there is a human tendency with the like in-group, out-group bias, right? It can give your work more meaning if you do feel that us versus them mentality. To me, it should be very like an us versus like the cold, cruel world that disrupts our services and systems, and that includes attackers. I think that's the healthier us versus them. But like talk to any sort of like platform engineer. I'm sure when they're coming up, like I have a friend who I know like deleted the production database when they were an intern. I am pretty sure that there are very few cybersecurity people that have been through something quite that catastrophic by their own hand, right? Like hearing some of these stories, it's just, people have to be up like, 48 hours straight, like debugging some sort of, production performance failure because like the system is down. There are all sorts of failures that can go wrong. And it's like, we can learn from them, but it's also, again, like building that kind of like cross empathy, because I know the software engineers would love to hear about your kind of like, in the trenches stories as well. And I think that's one way to build the commonality, is kind of like being able to laugh together at the absurdity of the internet and the fact that there are things like attackers and there are things just like internet weather, as we call it at Fastly, and other like weird bugs and esoteric failures. And, like clocks are hard in distributed systems. Like distributed systems to me are so much harder than cybersecurity, but that's a topic for another time. So yeah, I think we're definitely not alone. And some of the challenges can be even harder outside of cybersecurity. So, find your comrades, basically.
So we've got a question here from some folks watching, and I've got my own theory. I think there's this narrative that security is somehow so unique and different from everything else that we've got to do everything from scratch and figure out everything from scratch, which is clearly not the case. But yeah, the question is, where is this stemming from cybersecurity folks? Does it have to do with their backgrounds, like you're saying, like and this used to be a tough question to ask. People have been asking me for 2 decades, where do I start to get into security? And my answers have changed over the years, but I've almost always said, like, to secure a thing, like you have to know how that thing works, so you have to do something on the tech side. And with all the tech stuff shifting now, I remember when I would go to AWS reInvent every year, and I would talk to organizations about, how cloud and DevOps and all these changes are impacting their organization. They ended up with two different, IT was split into two. It was, people who could make the shift to the new way of thinking and people who couldn't, kind of got split off into two separate groups. So yeah, just curious, you're like where's this gap coming from in cybersecurity in the first place? Not, maybe that helps us eliminate it, maybe not, but curious as to your thoughts.
I do think a lot of it is background because, like you said, a lot of people don't have that kind of systems knowledge. I actually don't think you need that much systems knowledge, like even a kind of cursory high level understanding of just like distributed systems, like understanding kind of, I would argue no one understands how Kubernetes actually works, but like a basic understanding of that, basic understanding again of just like what is a CI/CD pipeline. I know, again, I've taught a lot of security, just like here's how software kind of like gets delivered from when you're writing code. I feel like those kind of things are the basics to have in place. When I talk to security leaders, because I was trying to understand, much like you, like what's the holdup, right? Like what's wrong? A lot of it is fear, right? They're worried they're going to be obsolete because of this new world where everything, software is eating the world, right? You do have to understand how software works. And if you don't know how that works, if you came up because you were good at managing firewalls, which was like a very legit job back in the day, it's not so relevant anymore because you can push out like firewall configurations via things like infrastructure as code, and then managing other tools through like the GUI. It's just like those skills don't really matter. And frankly, the security strategy that people had with more of like the perimeter model, it's kind of obsolete in many ways. And so I think it's a very valid fear that like, I'm obsolete because my skills and my knowledge are obsolete. So therefore I need to make sure the world stays in that same model that I have in my head of how it works. Like I need to restrict change because if the change happens, then maybe I'll be left behind. And I think it's very natural. It's a very natural human instinct to feel scared about that because, you have to feed yourself and your cats and loved ones, whoever else, right? So I think a lot of it is that kind of background and skill set. I also think, again, this kind of learned helplessness or defeatist attitude is, I don't think it actually takes that much to learn. We saw this kind of thing you brought up, like splitting IT into. The example I give in my book is you never really hear about database administrators anymore, right? Used to be a huge population, not unlike InfoSec, and now they don't really exist. It's all been incorporated by DevOps. And for the most part, everybody used to say, oh, we have unique database needs. But for the most part, people really most organizations don't. And there are enough database options that you can kind of choose whatever meets your needs and you can have a few and their control plane, like all that good stuff, right? And I kind of feel like cybersecurity is similar, where right now it's like, yeah, everything has to be bespoke and everything. It's like, does it really have to be? Like, are we certain? And so I at least think that we'll see a similar shift from DBA to more of a DevOps model. To me, it's cybersecurity more to the platform engineering model, which obviously is related to a lot or incorporates a lot of DevOps practices. So.
Yeah, and one of my light bulb moments was talking to Ryan Huber when he was over at Slack, and he would say it's easier for me to hire an engineer, a software engineer, and teach them security than the other way around because that fundamental knowledge that they already have and that experience they already have.
Yeah, when I work with software engineering teams a lot, right? And I agree, it's actually pretty easy to teach them about cybersecurity. They get really excited doing things like building out decision trees. And especially once you get them thinking about like, how do we raise the cost of attack? And you make them think like, if you had a really bad day or like, if like your employer like treated you poorly, how would you disrupt system operation? Because that gets them also thinking about the access they already have, which then they're thinking about the same sort of mindset of like an attacker that steals developer credentials, right? Which we've seen that in a few incidents recently. Like if you just get them thinking about what would make it harder or more expensive for you to disrupt the system, they kind of already they brainstorm solutions that are going to help in a meaningful way, like with the system's resilience against attack, right? Just to make it more expensive, to make it more tedious. A simple thing like implementing rate limiting on two-factor requests, right? Like the Uber breach, I think last year, where attacker basically like spammed a bunch of employees' phones with two-factor requests until someone was finally like, just please like stop it.
17 times. I think it was the 17th time they said yes.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's what human wouldn't do that, right? I think it's silly to blame the human in that scenario. So yeah, adding things like rate limiting, that's a solution that software engineers would think about. They would certainly think about things like, again, ephemerality, immutability. That's something they think about, again, with like, oh, the attacker can't pop a shell. They can't persist. Like they're going to have to like re-exploit the system. That's all very expensive and hard. And that's something, again, we probably want for reliability reasons. That's a pretty big win. And I am always amazed every time I do these kind of exercises with software engineers. There's so many things that I learn about where it's something, again, they're using for whatever reason, performance or just functionality. They're like, hey, actually, we could probably apply this to a cybersecurity use case and make it harder for attackers. And I just find that very beautiful. So I completely agree with Ryan's take that you don't have to do much in terms of teaching them about like how attackers work and think, to get them to understand like what's going to actually make a difference, and to get them thinking about especially things like secure by design, like embedding security by design in their platforms and systems.
Well, and humans are complex systems, right? Why would you not plan for a human failing? Like that's something that always got me is humans are the weakest link kind of stuff. And my response to that is always, no, the person who doesn't plan for the human failing is the weakest link. The person who thinks they can just send somebody, assign them security awareness training and somehow they're never going to make a mistake again. Like that's not how that works.
I know. Yeah, I feel like it was very unpopular when I was first kind of espousing those takes of like, listen, if like humans are still clicking on links after 2 decades, is it those people who are lazy and stupid or the people that are still surprised somehow that they're clicking on links? Like, let's be real. Like the joke I think I put on Twitter is like a meme from forever ago, where it's like, this is literally, computers are a thing clicking machine and you're telling humans not to click things on the thing clicking machine. Like that's nonsensical. Like that's not a strategy. Yeah. That's like a prayer at best. Right. And I think there's a thing I introduced in the book called the ice cream cone hierarchy of security solutions, which is you want to scoop a bunch of resilience ice cream into the cone. So you need a big cone. The very base of the cone, the really flimsy, like horrible triangle that's just like drippy ice cream, is administrative controls. Those are things like policies like thou shalt not click the link, and things like awareness training, which I have always asked people when they say like, yeah, awareness training's great. I'm like, okay, can I see the studies? Because the studies I've seen show, yeah, it can maybe help for like a couple days, maybe a couple weeks.
Or more harm than good.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And even Richard Thaler, who's a Nobel Prize laureate in economics, has talked about how phishing warnings are an example of sludge, which are basically like anti-patterns that you implement, that it's like adding unnecessary friction. Because the thing is, like I say with marketing people, right? They receive how many emails a day and what percentage of those are malicious? Like less than 1%. It is perfectly rational for them to click on things, and is completely irrational to base your security strategy around compelling them to not click on things. And like, to me, the problem is definitely, hey, we didn't design our security architecture assuming that the marketing person will click and open a PDF just like they do dozens of other times any given week, if not more. So yeah, that's a little tirade, but yeah, I think it's patently absurd that still in 2023, there's still cybersecurity people that are saying humans are the weakest link. We have to control human behavior. We have to get human brains to operate differently than they naturally do. It's like, no, we have to work with human behavior, not against it, or we will continue to fail. And again, it means that cybersecurity will be bypassed because the platform engineering teams will absolutely create, they're called like paved roads or other kind of like, again, making the easy way the secure way and cutting cybersecurity out because business has to get done. And increasingly, cybersecurity is at odds with that.
So a couple of things I think we have to hit before we run out of time here, Kelly. One of them, like we've been talking about platform engineering a lot, but honestly, my own understanding of platform engineering is probably lacking. So I want to hit that real quick, maybe a quick definition of that and what you're referring to when you say platform engineering.
Yeah, so I'm definitely relying on Camille Fournier, who I kind of view as like the OG or like the ultimate thought leader in this regard, because she's also like implemented it at her organizations. The long and short is basically you're treating internal systems like tools, whether that's developer tools or certainly, again, things like platforms, cybersecurity patterns. You're treating those as a product. So remember, you invited me to speak at B-Sides Knoxville ages ago, I feel like well over 5 years ago. And I talked about treating security as a product, where it's you have like user research, and your user stories, you develop like your MVP, minimum viable product, you like actually try to solve pain points, and you treat it again like a product that is going to be delivered to users because you do have actual users. You can't just do things in isolation, right? You have to actually be solving a real user problem and building things the same way you build a product. So platform engineering is basically, I didn't know that term at the time, but it's basically, treating these tools like a product. So with cybersecurity, you certainly want to understand, for instance, if it's like, okay, we have the user problem of like developers need to ship code quickly, but they want to make sure that obviously there's not like some sort of cyber attack that ends up costing the business money or causes an outage and things like that, right? There are a bunch of different ways you can solve that. One of those ways is like having the developer having to open up a completely new window that's like some crappy Java app from 2006 that does vulnerability scanning that results in like 1,000 false positives, and the developer will hate you. That is a solution. But probably when you interview the developer, similar to like doing user research, you're going to realize like, oh, like developers really like flow state where they can like do their work efficiently and they're like in the zone. And so we don't want to disrupt that. We need to, at the minimum, if we do want to implement vulnerability scanning, we need to put it in line with their workflows, right? And this is something very different than I see a lot of cybersecurity organizations do, where they kind of just like buy tools without input from the stakeholders who are actually going to be interacting with the thing ultimately, which I think is personally just reprehensible and irresponsible. And I don't use those terms lightly. So platform engineering, it's like you conduct the user research, you understand their perspectives, you understand their workflows, you understand their goals and constraints, and you figure out how to best navigate that and solve that. And again, you create things like prototypes, you can do things like feature flagging, you have kind of like an iterative roadmap, you obviously get feedback from the users once it's implemented. They can try out a beta and give you feedback and you can refine it. But it becomes, again, a much different mindset than like, I buy the tools and you have to use them, and like, you're bequeathing it or kind of like forcing you into these workflows where we didn't actually give a shit about whether it was going to interrupt your work or disrupt you. That's kind of the traditional model. And this new model, platform engineering, is like, hey, like, we can't build this stuff in a box because you actually have to interact with it and use it. So we're going to get your input and we're going to take it seriously. And that's going to very much drive how we solve the problem.
And then the last thing I wanted to, is probably the last thing we have time for, but just where the rubber meets the road here in terms of, the chaos in the title of the book and the term chaos engineering. And this is something I've seen in a lot of cases. I mentioned my old experiences with disaster recovery and business continuity, where most of what can go wrong, you're not going to know about until you actually try it. Right. So I think this is a struggle for a lot of folks on how to use failure in a more controlled way to help improve resilience of their systems. Right. How do organizations achieve that? When in a lot of these organizations, they don't have any budget for test environments, even for doing proofs of concepts of new products they're looking at buying, which are probably not going to solve any of their problems anyway. So practically, how do they approach this? How do the SRE folks do it?
The SRE folks, I think it really depends. A lot of times, like you said, if they don't have a test or staging environment, it becomes hard. I honestly think part of what's held back the adoption is the term chaos. I definitely prefer the term resilient stress testing, because that's what it is. You were stress testing the resilience of the system. I think it's slightly more grown up. Maybe it's not as hip, but there's a misconception that the goal is to cause chaos in production. And no, it's to make sure that we can fix things in production. This is something Aaron Reinhart definitely stresses, and something he did at United Health, is to make sure we can actually fix things. So on the SRE side, usually starting out in a staging environment is much healthier. Writing the experiment, conducting the experiment is in some ways easier than the social stuff. I don't think we have time for me to get into all the social things. It is in my book. I can definitely tell you, because I know, having been on the vendor side, how much some cybersecurity tools cost. This is going to be much less expensive, and it will actually show, if you want to talk about counterfactuals and being able to show like, hey, we, made sure that the business didn't, lose their shirt from this sort of attack. There wasn't a huge impact. Conducting a chaos experiment and showing like, hey, this would have been the impact if this had happened, and we've made this design change, ideally design change, to make sure that we either, minimize the impact or minimize the hazards related to this thing. Like, that is a very tangible thing you can do to prove your program's value. So the way I think about it is the resilience stress testing is basically the scientific method applied to things like cybersecurity, or it could be reliability as well. So you're developing hypotheses. I love decision trees for those. You are then conducting experiments to validate or deny those hypotheses, and you're using that evidence to learn from failure and figure out how to make the system better. And you can start proving that out over time to prove that the system is more resilient to these types of failures over time. So importantly, again, you don't want to start in production. You don't want to overthink it. Use your hypotheses around really basic assumptions, like the one Aaron did at United Health Group was like, our firewall will just detect and block misconfigured ports. A really basic assumption, right? What he found is that the firewall only worked like 60% of the time. So that assumption didn't actually hold up. So there are these really basic things that you can do for like control validation as well on the cybersecurity side to make sure that you are seeing the ROI of all the money you're spending. There's a great paper, I know this is long, but there was a great paper, I think 2 years ago now. It was an academic paper that measured the empirical efficacy of various EDR tools. And a lot of things they advertised that they did not do during this empirical assessment. So that's exactly what things like resilience stress tests can reveal. And you bet if you're a CISO, you can take that to your renewal or contract negotiation and be like, hey, you didn't actually help us with these failure scenarios. And that is a very powerful thing that can definitely save you money. So I personally dislike there isn't any money. There's certainly, again, social finessing that has to happen, but it is possible. I mean, I even know of a company that has self-serve chaos tests where it's just part of their like CI/CD workflow. You can just like be like, yeah, I want to like select from this menu of chaos experiments to run on like my new changes or new service. So it's definitely possible. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think that's all we have time for. There's so many other things we could dive into here, but we've linked Deciduous, your decision tree app, in the show notes, and your book in the show notes here. The book is very readable. I've been, to prepare for this conversation, I've been reading through it. I find the format very useful, and tons of examples too. And I think that's what's missing from a lot of books is actual examples that you can learn from. And yeah, this was great. Thank you, Kelly.
No, thank you. Great questions and a pleasure as always.
All right, we'll be right back in a few moments with the weekly enterprise news, and Mr. Tyler Shields will be joining us.
Created in 2005 and hosted by security industry veterans, Paul's Security Weekly is your source for in-depth coverage of the latest vulnerabilities, exploits, and security research. Our weekly security news discussion dives deep into the security issues we face today and potential solutions in a fun and lively atmosphere. Each week, we bring on guests from the security community to learn about their journey and discuss topics relevant to their work and research. You can also subscribe to our show by visiting securityweekly.com/subscribe or look for Paul's Security Weekly in your favorite podcast catcher. We've recorded a ton of content over the years, so we created Spotify playlists featuring some of our favorite episodes, including interviews with Marcus Random, John McAfee, and Chris Roberts, to name a few. You can find them at securityweekly.com/starter packs.
Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Follow us on LinkedIn for updates across our organization, show highlights, and more. You can find us by searching for Security Weekly Productions. And now for the Enterprise Security Weekly news. You can check out securityweekly.com/ESW339 if you want to follow along and check out the stories we're going to be talking about today. And that is the acronym for the show and the number. We are on number 339. I'm not sure how many I've done, but it's a lot. We also have Mr. Tyler Shields joining us. Hello, Tyler.
Hey, what's going on, my friend? Good to see you again. And episode 339, that is a lot of shows.
And Katie is still with us. We had some good conversations today, good interviews. Lots of interesting stuff, fun stuff. All right, so I want to start with the acquisitions because there's some pretty big ones. Yeah, you agree, Tyler?
Sure. That sounds wonderful. There are a couple of big ones this past week and a half or so.
So I've got my opinion on enterprise browsers, and just because one had a decent exit doesn't change my opinion on it. But Talon did have a decent exit. I guess, I don't know, 3x of money raised, something like that. But Talon Cyber got acquired. Rumor is, it's not an official number, $625 million to Palo Alto Networks.
Yeah, pretty serious acquisition for a market that we didn't think was the viable, worthy of anything. But apparently there must be a there, as they say.
So we got to separate out two things. Just because somebody's buying a product. So again, go back to FireEye. FireEye went public. They bought Mandiant for nearly $1 billion. Product didn't have a whole lot of value, didn't matter, right? Like you can build a successful cybersecurity company and have a product that's a complete flop. It's just the nature of cybersecurity. Like you don't know why you didn't have that breach. Was it the $1 million you spent on FireEye or the $1 million you spent on training personnel?
Yeah, it's always tough to know
implementing good processes.
Yeah, within reason, it's tough to know what the correct mitigating factor that stops something could be. And that's what they always say about the defense in depth, right? That's why you have it, because one thing may stop it while something else may not. But the problem with defense in depth, as we all know, is depending on how much you lean into the statement can very quickly turn into expense in depth, right? And you end up just blowing a lot of money for no required reason. And like anything else in cyber, it's a balance. It's about finding the correct balance given the risk portfolio of your environment.
So in my case, when we acquired FireEye, after I recommended we don't, I kept track of exactly what the value was in US dollars. So it was the cost of the system, the cost of the labor, and every time it discovered a false positive and we had to work with support, that was additional negative value it was producing. And overall, over the first year of ownership, it produced about $500,000 of negative value.
Oof.
Never once produced any positive value.
That's the interesting thing, right? I wonder how many other industries you can have that you can buy something and directly produce a negative value for your business or for your household or your individual, right? So like when you buy a car, in general, I don't know of buying a new car anyway. Certainly a dud lemon or something could be a negative value, right?
You still get utility out of it, even if your Jaguar, depreciates 78% in the first year, right?
Yeah, but it's still not a negative value. Well, I guess it is. But man, that's a lot of negative value in 1 year, man.
Imagine you bought that car, it depreciated, it also never started. Like the car never actually, like you never even got a mile of usage out of it. That's the level we're talking about here.
Well, I guess maybe that's the problem we have with most cybersecurity companies these days.
But the problem is the industry is so trained in justification of why that's not negative value, trained on the buzzwords, trained on the corporate speak, trained on the, sort of like I was asking Kelly in the last interview, trained on creating the smoke and mirrors so that there's always a reason. It's not the tool, it's not the process, it's something we can't control. Else is to blame. Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's the chaos theory. And we are very, very trained on the justification piece in this industry. And it's also not simple, right? It's not a binary. It's not like buy a tool, fix a problem. And it's also not take out a tool, don't fix a problem. Like what, you can't make those, it's just like with your physical health, right? There are often numerous things that go into it. So in that way, it's similar. But I think in terms of, hey, this has negative value, it depends how you spin it, right? And a lot of people can spin a lot of things pretty well, especially when they're keeping the whole idea of cybersecurity a little bit shrouded in this quote unquote mystery of, black box theory.
Yeah, and it's I mean that's exactly what we were talking to Kelly about is where's the rubber meets the road here is you've got to have some way you got to have success criteria, right? And even a lot of cybersecurity vendors are concerned with this, right? Like they don't want churn. They want to make sure you're buying it for the right reasons. It's something you can actually get good use out of, because word of mouth goes both ways, right? And that's what really hurt FireEye is, they about 4 years in, they started seeing a whole lot of churn. A lot of people were talking about the fact that they wasted money. They felt like they had wasted their money on it, and it was tough to recover from. So, yeah, you got to have. I feel like most POCs, like it's very difficult for most organizations to prove the value of a product. They've got no time to build the POV POC process. They don't have an environment to put it in, and it's really not going to be until after they buy it and really start using it in production, that they're going to realize, okay, yeah, this is something producing value for us or not.
So to go back to the car analogy, you have to buy that car sight unseen without taking it for a test drive, get it home and hope it starts.
Yeah.
Well, on the bright side, they picked it up for $600 million. Apollo picked up Talon for $600 million. That's what started this little rant about value in markets and value in products. But they also picked up, and I don't know if we have it on here. I think we covered it last week, if I recall correctly. Was Dig, I think, for $400. So they spent about $1 billion in the last couple weeks, really.
And I imagine that was probably by design, right? Like this stuff goes on. They probably decided, hey, we need to spend about $1 billion on some acquisitions. Let's go shopping, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting the way the corporate development world works. There's certainly initiatives to go buy a thing that fulfills a need for the company or may fulfill a business gap. For example, like if they don't have any offering around data security, like Dig could have been something that filled a gap. But then there's also very opportunistic approaches to corporate development where, hey, this company's great, it's healthy, it's not healthy, it's doing well, but it's burning. They never figured out their go-to-market engine. We have a great go-to-market engine. Our sellers could sell this, off the truck all day long. We just need the tech, jumpstart us by a couple of years of building it, and then we can pick it up as a distressed or low-cost asset. So there's both flavors of corporate development that get put in here. I don't think either one of these at the multiples that they were done were distressed by any means. That's not what I'm suggesting. I think quite the opposite. I think they were both shopped for. Apollo knew what it wanted to add to its roster of products. It knew the people involved. It's probably been courting them for a while, because that's another thing that it goes down to is they do partnerships and integrations for over a year and a half, and then, okay, now it's time. It's time to bring you firmly and finally into the family. And so, yeah, that's likely what happened on both of these.
Yeah. We got a comment in the Discord, yachts are the right analogy for negative value.
Yes, they are. Yachts and airplanes.
Yachts and airplanes.
Don't spend your money on either one.
Yeah. So, for context, $1 billion in the last month. And I looked at their market cap earlier this week, and I think it's around 73 billion for just for context of those purchases.
Yeah. Apollo's doing some amazing stuff right now. And it's, I don't know if we have it in our article list. I posted it in the CyberY yesterday. They're making some pretty big moves around XSIAM, SIS to replace SIEM. I don't even know what XSIAM stands for, but apparently it's a new age version of SIM. But they're making a big play here. Apollo is making a moonshot play really at being the largest cyber data collection engine across the board. They want to be able to collect data around every single aspect of your environment with regards to cybersecurity, whether it be events, whether it be asset data, whether it be data security, as with this acquisition, actions happening within the browser, actions happening within the endpoint, actions happening within the network. They're going to eventually farm all that into a central repository, layer AI and ML onto it. That's the new war. That's where the new cyber unified battleground is going to fight right there. Palo's going to play. Cisco wants to play based on their latest acquisition of Splunk. They want to try to play there. Question is, who's going to win? Who's going to be able to? I like what Palo's doing today, and I think these two acquisitions play a piece of that bigger story.
There's a lot of value in having a single integrated platform for this stuff, and not it reduces the overhead of having to buy separate products and integrate separate products. But yeah, so XSIAM is Extended Security Intelligence and Automation Management, which sounds to me like you're taking XDR, SIM, and SOAR and smooshing it all together. All for the purpose of
Adrian. It's bigger play than that. I think it extends to any behavior, any event, any asset over time. It may not be day one, right? But this play to me is the forged in Mordor ring. That's what they're shooting for. I don't know if they'll ever get there, right? But that's the nirvana that they're spinning for.
But the problem is still the same as your standalone XDR and SIM. Are you going to see the right things at the right time, in enough time, and have the capability to respond to it and do something about it? And that's always been that's been the promise from the very first SIM ever. And it's we've been chasing it ever since. It's really hard to do.
Well, let me ask you a question about that. Why can't we do it? What is the big holdup that stops us from doing it?
My opinion. So I think of it in terms of red flags and yellow flags. And I think people in engineering want all the flags all the time, and you don't get to do that and see things that matter. If you have this hoarding mindset where I want to collect everything, then you're making it harder to detect the things that matter.
Why?
So
because of a lack of ability to grok that much data in a human capacity?
Well, yes. When I first set up our SIM in 2004, I immediately shoved logs from over 1,700 devices into it. We're collecting over 100 million logs a day. There's just no way I was going to detect anything meaningful. And if I even wanted to see spikes in logs, I had to create all the reporting and the graphs for that manually. And if there was a big spike in firewall logs, we'd go and investigate that. It would take us a couple hours. But every single day, out of those 1,700 devices, about 50 of them would stop sending us logs. And we'd have to go investigate as to why we were no longer getting those logs. So just the management of that beast of a system, and keeping it fed and keeping those logs. So we talked to the Linux guys, and they blew away the syslog.conf on accident. So they had to add it back. Just huge amount of overhead just to feed one of these data lakes and keep it running. And then, red flags are things that are always bad. You always want to know if somebody's created a new super admin account in Google Workspace, if your whole company's based on Google Workspace, versus a yellow flag is, well, if this happens and it's this time of day and it's not normal for that to happen in this time of day, you have all these things that have to combine for it to be something concerning. That's where you get lost. And that's where I think by not separating the red flags, ensuring the red flags show up first, instead of chasing all these yellow flags, all the impossible travel, right? Like I can impossible travel all day if I have a VPN, right? And I can trigger all these impossible travel alerts, and they're all going to be false positives. And yet that's everybody's first example when they, in a lot of these systems, are these examples that are almost always false positives.
So let me play the counterpoint on that, though. And this is where I'm going to show my my futuristic tendencies, my states, the fact that I live 5 to 7 years in the future. What if all of that was automated, machine learning, AI enabled? The ability to grok that much data becomes possible in the sense of infinite speed and infinite resources, right? And if we can throw infinite compute at that problem, we could potentially, in theory, solve that problem of finding the yellows, finding the reds, triaging them. And let's really take it a step further and say, now we connect it to automations on the back end that we don't trust day one to fix the problem, but maybe we do day 2 or day 5 or day 500, right, at some point. And so if we're thinking futures, isn't the problem really 3 phases? Collecting the massive amount of data. Whoever gets the most data has the oil in cyber. Whoever can do analysis of that using automated systems without requiring human capacity in the deepest and most effective and lowest false positive way, and then automating and triggering over APIs the backends that are going to occur for remediation. Can we get to one ring to rule them? That's the fundamental bet that I think Paolo's making in a 10-year run, in a 7 to 10 year run.
I don't think it's ever going to be the tools that are really going to hold us back, that are going to be the bottleneck. I think if you created a perfect tool that only showed you red flags, I think somebody would uncheck that box and say, no, actually show me all the yellow flags also. I think they would self-sabotage in that case.
So I don't think human resources go to zero in cyber. What I'm saying is that the tooling is going to roll up. It has to roll up into a single system.
But so much of it's a mindset. Like nobody's going to automatically remediate stuff. Like I don't see a time anywhere because you're going to break people, because you're going to disconnect the CEO in the middle of an important discussion
today.
Right, it'll be in the middle of a presentation.
Well, today, yes. Tomorrow, no. I mean, there was a day when nobody would run a DAS scanner on your website because you dropped it. It would drop websites left and right. But now everybody fires DAS scanners at their website like it's nothing. I think at some point, automation, at least for a percentage, 10, 20, 50, maybe 70, we can debate the percentage, but at some point that becomes a reality.
Yeah.
And it also depends what you consider auto remediation, right? Like there are different levels of remediation that people will tolerate. And, right now, humans don't trust the machines. Yes, I think it will come over time. It's going to be a long time, but there are definite levels of what we're going to see in the next 5-10 years versus maybe 25 years ago from now. But, auto ticketing is a form of, quote, remediation, right? Depends on your definition. It depends on your nomenclature. So what is auto remediation? And I agree with Adrian that, people are going to remain pretty skeptical because all it's going to do is take one incident at a company where somebody gets reamed out by the CEO for the entire security department to go.
Yeah, when we first tried out MDM software on mobile phones, we wiped 2 people's phones on accident, and they were not syncing or backing up the last couple years worth of family photos from their phones. And once word of that got out, nobody was willing to have MDM software installed on their mobile phones after that.
Yeah, but fast forward X months, Adrian. Fast forward X months, everybody used MDM in that era. They don't anymore, but they did in that era.
Yeah. But and there's all these corner cases too, right? Like, if most of what you're concerned about, or a lot of what you're concerned about is in SaaS and you don't have logs for that, how does that get into this AI system? Or they're not, the logs you need are not coming from because more and more we're handing off the shared responsibility model. And, if Microsoft, so even in Microsoft's own case, they couldn't figure out when China had originally got into their systems during that breach because the retention of their own logs wasn't long enough. They only had 2 weeks worth of logs. And by the time they found out about the incident, it was a month in. So there's all these little corner cases that are always going to sneak up and bite you, I think.
You guys need to put on your dreamer hats, your cloud hats. Live in the future with me. Come on, the weather's warm up here.
Oh, I've been there though, and reality always crashes in.
I know I keep getting bit too, but I can't seem to get away from it. I keep going back.
And it's exactly like we were talking about with Kelly, right? Like, people want to keep their jobs, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. I need to make money to have shelter and food and take care of my family and et cetera, et cetera. So nobody wants to be like, I'm going to put my whole life on the line and maybe get fired for doing something that's kind of risky at this stage. There are very few people who are going to do that.
And I think the emphasis needs to move. Like there's so much emphasis on the SOC and on detecting something quick enough to do something about it. And I think we continue to invest in that, but more so, like in the Okta case, they should have known, or they must have known that customers were putting credentials into these HAR files and then uploading them to their support site, because they had a note on there that said, don't do that. But they know human nature. They know, of course, scrubbing these credentials takes extra time. A lot of people aren't going to know how to do that or what that means. They're just trying to get something fixed, so they're going to upload that file anyway. And that wouldn't have been such a big incident for Okta if they had planned for that and done something on their side to scrub credentials out of these support files that freaking Cloudflare and 1Password were handing to them. That should not have been a surprise that there were credentials in these files and these files were sitting on this system. So prevention, limiting how bad the bad thing can be, I think has to be a bigger factor here. And we saw these vendors who got hit by that Okta breach benefit from that. They're like, the attacker got into our systems, but they couldn't go much further than that because we're doing zero trust this and isolated that. And what they had access to was very limited, and they never got to any production systems or customer stuff. So we're seeing the and then on the other side, the Okta breach, 1Password told them, hey, something funny's going on here. Okta was like, nah, it's not us. It must be you guys. And they tear apart this laptop looking for malware. And can you imagine the engineer who uploaded that HAR file? Like his whole life probably got torn apart in those 2 weeks that 1Password thought it must be them. And then Beyond Trust said, yeah, no, it's not us, it's you guys. And still took another 2 weeks for Okta to believe what they were being told. And we saw this in the case with Target too, where, Symantec, FireEye both caught the Target attack. Somebody called up Target on the phone and said, hey, you got a problem. And they still didn't believe what they were seeing and what they were hearing. So there's still very much, I think, a people process part of this that's going to have to mature along with the products. So even if you have that magic product, the people, the training, the processes have to get there also for it to be able to help you.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree. I don't think I meant to suggest that the product solves cyber. What I guess I meant to suggest is it solves the tool issue of cyber if done right by unifying a whole lot of technologies into a single platform that can detect a whole lot of problems across what used to be a whole lot of siloed tool situations. 100% am not suggesting that
reducing overhead would be a huge help. Yeah. Reducing overhead, detection engineering overhead, integration overhead, building connectors and integrations overhead. Like there's a ton of overhead there that I think AI and other efforts here can really reduce.
Well, we went a long way on that first storyline.
That was a good rabbit hole to go down, though. I like that. That was a good discussion. Yeah.
Where do we go from here, boss?
So acquisitions. We're still in acquisitions. Travelers Insurance acquired Corvus Insurance. So we're starting to see the insurtechs, the MGAs, get bought up by larger insurance companies, which is interesting. We've kind of followed the path of cybersecurity specific insurtechs emerging and growing. And speaking of which, Cowbell got a $25 million round of funding, another insurtech.
I have to say it, Adrian. We need more Cowbell.
Yep. We need more Cowbell. Well, somebody agreed with you because they gave him $25 million for more Cowbell. That's a lot. That buys you a lot of Cowbell.
That's a lot of Will. What's his name? Banging the cowbell while dancing around.
Will Ferrell.
That's what that's a lot of.
Blue Oyster Cult.
That's right. So my thoughts on this one's interesting too, Adrian. I'll just kind of chuck this grenade out there too. At what point do the private equity companies get involved, if they're not already, and start rolling up these things? The interesting thing about insurance is that it's a natural reoccurring revenue stream, right? You sell the insurance once, and in general, if you're doing it right and you're servicing your client well, and nothing happens, they keep coming back. They just keep re-upping their insurance. They keep going. That's the interesting thing about insurance is sell once, cash in many times year over year for a long period of time. That is a private equity dream. That's exactly the kind of companies that private equity absolutely loves. They buy them once, they buy them small, they roll them up. But I wonder if we're going to see in the next year or two a bit of a roll-up. If we haven't already, because I haven't read these stories, maybe there is a private equity storyline to what's happening here. But I believe that at some point, private equity is going to get involved and start rolling these up into a mega insurance firm.
Would that go against a monopoly issue, though?
Yeah, it's only a monopoly issue when you get called out, right? Like there's so many monopolies going on in the U.S. right now that just haven't been called out that they don't worry about that until they have to, right? They'll start the roll-up process, get a bunch of them, and then worry about the roll-up. They're the monopoly.
Yeah, it's a tomorrow problem.
It is a tomorrow problem, absolutely. And by that point, they've already cashed in so much money, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if this trend continues, it sounds more like, just kind of a pivot or an addition to an insurance product line, right? Like Travelers is a large general insurer, just picking up a cybersecurity product here is what I'm seeing.
Yeah, what I'd like to see, though, is like a Vista, a Thoma Bravo, or some of these guys to buy 3, 4, 5 of the small to mid-sized insurers, roll them up into a mega insurer, and run against Travelers. Be the alternate, be the big player in the space.
Yeah, it's kind of a trend we're seeing, right? Like we're seeing managed services managed by investors like traditional software companies. So now insurance, so kind of innovation in terms of, what you can get those kind of multiples out of, that's not a traditional tech company or software company.
That's right.
PagerDuty acquires Gelio, and I think this was kind of a, like adjacent thing for them. PagerDuty isn't strictly a security company, and Gelio was kind of automating a security use case on top of PagerDuty. So kind of just one of these things that totally made sense. I think it's one of those things where like 90% of Jelly's customers have it integrated with PagerDuty, so why wouldn't they acquire them, right?
I mean, come on. It sounds about as good as peanut butter and Jelly-O.
And
Katie's
moving
shaking
on.
her head for those that aren't watching live. She's just giving me the SMH right now.
Yeah, so the funding that's number one on the list, I don't know a lot about, except this company was bootstrapped, and then they just got a $65 million growth in equity investment. I don't know much about Fusion Auth, but it's certainly. I mean, we've seen it before. Bishop Fox raising funding from ForgePoint to build a product. A traditional services company deciding to build their. Trying to remember the name of the product now. but gotta look it up. Cosmos. Yeah, it used to be called Cast. So, interesting. Though this isn't a services company, this does look like a product company.
So FusionAuth is it's a number of things together, right? They pull together authentication, registration, login, user management features for folks building applications, and they offer
like an
a single
competitor.
package. Could be, but they have a free community. I mean, really what got them this funding was they have a massive free community edition that has over 13 million downloads, which means it's being used heavily around the world. They have 100% year-over-year growth, and most importantly, they're profitable. They make money. God forbid a company make money, right? So they're making money on their product, which when it comes to investment, again, if you make money and you're profitable and you're showing 100% year-over-year growth on a reasonable base number, you can get funded today, right? That we're just looking for actual good metrics.
Yep. And should not be a shock, they're hiring.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's good news to hear. Definitely in this market.
It's going to be interesting to see how this impacts their growth expectations and their profitability. You know, the minute you take in $65 million, do you get on that treadmill and start to burn harder to try to grow faster, thus compromising for a while your choice to be profitable with the expectation that we're going to catch it back later? I would love to follow that as a case study. I think it would be kind of neat to see now that they've gone from bootstrapped and profitable to $65 million invested venture-backed company. Do they start to be okay with the burn and churn and try to corner a market quickly approach that's generally comes with VC?
Yeah, it's interesting.
Well, they're going to have pressures that they didn't have before.
Right.
And not just
listen, I don't know how many rounds they've taken. I'd have to check it out. I'm making an assumption here that could be wrong, that this is their first round based on being profitable and doing well. Maybe it's their second round, whatever it is. They still own the majority of the company. They don't have to do anything the VC tells them. It's highly recommended, but they don't have to. They can just sit back and say, hey, we're going to remain profitable and grow this thing for another 8 years and be healthy about it. It usually doesn't go down that way because everybody wants to try to run the market over and target it and take over the whole TAM, but it's going to be interesting to watch.
Yeah, I've seen both happen, right? Like I've seen companies that aren't pressured to do that, but then companies that are, and it all goes wrong. Like they grow the wrong way. There was a hosting company that a friend of mine worked for that was just like a poster child for how not to use that investment, how not to grow. And they blew themselves up pretty quick. And it was mostly through just breaking SLAs, just downtime, taking some big name. I think they had one customer who was like 60% of the revenue, and they killed the contract because they were down more than 3 times in one quarter or something like that. And there was an out in the contract for that. So 60% of revenue just went away, and the whole company just cratered after that. Like the momentum was unstoppable at that point. Whereas,
somebody made a boo-boo.
Like 1Password is on the other side here, right? Like they were bootstrapped. Canadian company took their first, I think their first round of investment was $100 million. And so they're another one. They're another case study you could follow that's very similar to this one.
Yeah, there's an article out there by Bryce Roberts, who was an investor in a company that I worked with years ago. The article is called "Putting the Emphasis on the Wrong Syllable," which is it's an interesting look back. He's been an investor focused on healthy companies with his investment firm called Indie.vc, where their goal all along was to give you money and tell you to be profitable as soon as possible and to get your company to grow in a healthy way. And now all of a sudden everybody wants their narrative, and they've been running this narrative for 7 years, right? So I'll send this over to Sam and the team to pop onto our stories list. But it's a really interesting article, especially when you look back at when he wrote this in 2015. There's a really good quote in here. It says, With capital and a dangerous narrative, we're not unicorn hunting. Rather, we're becoming the subprime lenders of the internet economy, funding digital McMansions built on increasingly questionable foundations. He wrote that in 2015 about the investment world. How poignant. So I do recommend you give this a look, especially if you're a founder looking to build a healthy company done in a healthy way. Brace is a great investor, and we'll put it on I'll have it put on the stories list.
Yeah, I'll add it to the show notes if you share it on the Slack. So ChainGuard raised 61 million Series B, supply chain security company. I think has some folks who were very. I forget who the founders were, but people were very excited when they saw that. So I think there's a lot of good community capital behind some of the founders there. Dan Lorick.
ChainGuard's doing cool stuff. They chase down a lot of Bitcoin criminals. Really, really cool research. If you get to look at their research blogs and stuff, I highly recommend it.
This is different from what you're thinking of.
Oh, is it? What am I thinking of?
Yeah. This is not the Bitcoin. This is supply chain security. So this is not the. Oh, you're thinking of. What are you thinking of?
Is there a ChainGuard? Is there?
I know exactly. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's called ChainGuard. Yeah, ChainGuard.1 instead of ChainGuard.com.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Two
ignore me then.
Right? Yeah. Also, Graylog, which is a log management. I don't know if they're calling themselves a SIM. I'll call them a SIM too. SIM and log management.
If they do
company.
it, you can do it.
Yeah. Another freemium community edition. Network effect grown company. Very PLG run company. Raised $39 million. So pretty good raise.
Hey, Adrian. It's the first time in 3 years I've spilt my bourbon on my laptop, so I'm going to run down and get a towel. Why don't you cut to Katie? She's going to back me up. I'll be right back.
All right. I think that would be worse if it was water. I think bourbon, it'll be okay. If it were a glass of water, I think it'd be worse.
But bourbon is okay for keyboards, but not so much water?
Yeah, I think so. More so.
Okay.
I would say.
All right.
But he probably had ice in it, so it's probably a mix of both. If it's an apple, they do pretty well having stuff poured in them.
I have actually fairly recently. I dumped a giant mug of tea on my keyboard, and it was fine.
Yeah,
I don't know what to think though. I don't know if this is going to be
a lot of
like,
waterproofing.
Hey guys, I don't know if this is going to be like, hey, it's going to smell like alcohol if it breaks, and I got to return it to my company. That would be a bad mode.
Well, hopefully, didn't you just join your company? Hopefully, you're not planning an exit this soon.
I still look like an alcoholic when I have when I return a bourbon soap laptop to him because it's broken. I hope it doesn't break.
And that would be entirely inaccurate because no, just kidding.
Easy.
This is a public live podcast, so technically your employer could watch this. Anyway,
there's literally bourbon dripping out of the bottom of my laptop.
Yeah, not making your case any better.
All right.
Yes, moving on.
All right, let's enough about the market and stuff. Let's see. So we had Kelly on earlier, and she did mention her latest essay was just this kind of deep dive on the origin of not just the word security, but what we mean when we say security. And I haven't had a chance to get through all of it, but this is intriguing to me because I remember when Daniel Miessler shared, I think it was a tweet. I don't think it was one of his essays, but maybe it was an essay. Well, he was also talking about the origins of the word security, where if you go back to the Latin, it means without worry, which kind of gives you a different idea of what security is all about, right? Like, is it about removing all risk? Is it about protecting things? Or without worry kind of makes you think of more the psychological nature of it, like security being more about how it makes you feel, anxiety levels, how well you sleep at night, which is I think an interesting conversation to have, at least. But different way of looking at security in general.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just I browsed through this earlier, and as she said in her interview, her goal is to be thought-provoking, not necessarily to have 100% of the answers. And she does bring up a lot of questions, like not just what do we mean, but how does it change? How can you adapt it? How does it affect you? How does that change over time? So it's an evolving concept, and it's not just a word like, InfoSec or cybersecurity. It's an approach, it's a philosophy, it's a concept, and I really I like that. It's because we tend to look at security as something that's a concrete. We tend to look at security as something that's a people, a process, or a technology, not a concept that people, process, and technology contribute to. So I thought it was pretty
I think it's worthwhile, thinking about just a concept of security and what it means practically. Like I've seen in some cases people talking about removing all risk. I'm like, no, that's not the goal at all. Like, if you remove all risk and you're talking about in terms of a company and its health and its growth, or removing all risk from an investment, you're talking about eliminating growth, because there has to be some risk if you're going to make some money or if you're going to grow a company. You don't want to be the last one to move into a profitable new sector, but you don't know if that sector is going to be profitable until you're there. So risk is necessary.
And the thing is, with risk, the concept, the idea, again, it's a concept, it's an idea. It's been around for so much longer than cybersecurity or InfoSec or whatever we want to call it has been. And so people are much more comfortable with the concept of risk. And in a business context, in a corporate context, boards of directors, executive, business unit heads have learned over really centuries, but if we just want to go back a few decades for this, current industrial revolution or whatever it is, people are accepting of the concept. They know how to deal with the concept. Nobody, maybe in cybersecurity, but outside of cybersecurity, you don't hear people talking about eliminating risk. You hear them talking about managing risk. And because cybersecurity is so much newer, we tend to look at it as a, concrete block. It is this, instead of a concept that we can manage, that changes over time.
Right. And when you manage your 401k, like you get a slider, right? Like how aggressive do you want to be? Like how much risk are you comfortable with? And that's
exactly. When you're young, the old theory goes, when you're young in a 401k, you're super aggressive, and then it slides over time as you get a little older and nearer to retirement. Same concept. But we really haven't embraced that. Obviously, that's not, the older a company is, the less risk we want to take. That's not necessarily a one-to-one parallel, but it can shift with the market. It can shift with social, political, economic, whatever outside factors. It's not this static thing that doesn't move. It's constantly changing and shifting, but it is an idea that has shades of gray.
Yeah. Like to use an example, I had a friend who was giving a talk at B-Sides Las Vegas, and he had spent 6 months putting together some kind of email security tool. I forget exactly what it was. So he was both going to give a talk about it, and he was going to release this tool for the first time. And he had to cancel his talk because he had encrypted everything. His slides, all the work he did on the tool, the actual source code for the tool, everything was encrypted in a container, and he couldn't decrypt it. Yeah, like the password or what he thought was the password wasn't working, or the key was corrupted or something. I forget exactly why he couldn't decrypt it. And I remember thinking about that, thinking like that, the risk of, like, the worst case scenario here is something he was going to make completely open source and public gets released early. And to me, that's not worth the risk of losing, that data forever, losing 6 months of work and, the ability to do this, this talk that might help your career.
Well, part of it is a personality thing too. Certain people are more risk averse than others.
Very much.
But
very much so.
I love how Kelly, and she relies on a lot of other sources too to prove her point, which is also a great, I think, way of thinking about things. The idea of cybersecurity, it doesn't have to be one thing. It can be an idea. And it's like, you and I, we go back talking about zero trust back in 2018, and everybody was going, oh, there are zero trust products. And same thing, we can relate this to so many other things, like not a product, concept, framework, idea, approach. Why shouldn't cybersecurity as a whole be a concept, a framework, an approach?
Yep. Yeah, so good essay to dive into. Definitely a long read, so but a fun read. And
you never feel like when you're reading her stuff, though, like, oh my God, are we really only on page 4?
Don't sleep on the footnotes. The footnotes are fun. The next one, the next essay I really liked, and Tyler, I did get putting the emphasis on the wrong syllable added, emphasis on the wrong syllable. That is now in the show notes.
Excellent.
But number 12 is really interesting. No Way Out: The Changing World of Cybersecurity Exits. So I don't know the person that did this, but very much feels like some of Ross Hollyluke's stuff. Some of the other stuff we like out there, some of Mike Prevett's stuff. But he does some analysis of all the cybersecurity unicorns or supposed unicorns out there, right? Like a lot of this data is pre-market drop. So the valuations have not been adjusted yet because those companies have not received new valuations. But basically, he's talking about like what are the possible exits for these companies? What's going to happen here? And he's got some really good analysis here.
There was also a footnote, but I thought this was really interesting. And again, thought-provoking versus here's what it is. It was an idea about that we're in uncharted territory here because we haven't been through this exact scenario in current day. But it was a really interesting take, and I don't know, I think he's on to something here. We're going to have a lot of CEOs and VCs and founders who are really surprised that there's quite literally nowhere to go for them.
Well, I think we're already there, right? Like we're already, I don't know how far into this, a quarter of the way into this, half of the way into this, but yeah, we've already seen some exits that must have been disappointing to investors and founders. Some exits that like we're talking about today, where it's actually pretty lucky to get such a decent exit in this market. But yeah, I don't think I think we still have a lot of startups that are just not going to be around a year from now, and I don't think we've seen most of those yet. And I'm really interested. So he's got this middle tier here, where it's he says there have been 10 total cybersecurity acquisitions above $5 billion by strategic buyers. 10 ever. And you go down to the level below that, and it's like 118 companies expecting $1 billion exits. That there's just no way that's going to happen. So yeah, what's going to happen to these companies? I did say we were going to stop talking about the market. I lied. I put this in the wrong place.
I don't think there's any chance of that ever really happening on this show.
Yeah. Well, I thought we were done with all the market stories. I'd forgotten this one was kind of in the middle as an essay.
There are horses. We will beat them. Oh, there are unicorns. We will beat them. They are horses with horns.
So So if you subscribe to the RSS feed of databreaches.net, you'll understand that what I've included here, story number 13, Southwestern Ontario hospitals will rebuild network from scratch amid fallout from cyber attack. More data leaked.
That sounds really fun.
Like this is such a common and normal thing these days that you really have to follow the RSS feed to appreciate how disturbingly normal this is. But the reason I included it is because it's not always from scratch. But the idea of, ransomware operators said, okay, we're not going to go after hospitals or healthcare and stuff like that. Not only was that a lie, like, can you imagine the disruption from having to rebuild not just one, but several hospitals from scratch? I can't imagine.
Then again, given the state of hospital security, maybe that's a good thing.
You think it's going to get rebuilt well in the amount of time that they're going to give themselves?
I didn't say that. You didn't hear that come out of my face.
I don't know that it's going to be a good thing. I don't know that they're going to be.
I was just positing that maybe there is an opportunity of which these people
they're
could take
businesses,
advantage.
Right? Like, if they want people to go back to those hospitals, they've got to do at least somewhat assure people that,
Really?
okay, we've done a better job this time, right?
You think the average consumer cares?
When they're being operated on? I would think so.
Well, yeah, if you don't have my right vitals, I'm dead anyway. But no, do you think the average consumer either knows or cares? I don't.
I don't know. This is mainstream. Most of these news, when you look at databreaches.net,
in and out of hospitals and doctors' offices for various non-life-threatening reasons lately, and the amount
these are
data
huge stories
just
in their communities. These are huge stories.
So they don't even care. They just don't even care. They're saying it out loud. They're certainly not going to care about their EHRs.
Yeah, I don't know. Almost all this reporting, like it doesn't even get to the national level. It's so normal. But anybody who still watches their local news would probably know about this.
Well, they would know, but I don't think they care. I don't think the average consumer thinks about their health information as something that anybody would want access to.
We'll find out if we start hearing about more hospitals going under. We'll find out. I guess.
Didn't we have one last week, like go completely under and die? Wasn't it?
Yeah, we did. I
don't remember which one it was, but I remember reading a story of they were just like, you know what? Forget it. We're done. We quit. We throw in the towel.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I'll pull it up. I actually just added a new company to the destroyed by breach list. It was a Danish hosting company that all their customers' websites, all their servers all got encrypted, and they didn't pay the ransom, and they were able to recover zero customer data. And so they just I actually, the CEO of the company, I just pinged him on LinkedIn earlier asking to interview him because I saw he actually gave a talk about his experiences. He says he wants to share his experiences so other people can learn from it. So maybe we could bring him on the show. But yeah, looks like that hosting company went under. That was Cloud Nordic was the name of it.
That takes some. I got to admit, that takes a little bit of chutzpah to say, hey, I know you're out of business and you're the former CEO, but are you interested in coming on our show?
Yeah. Yeah, it was Illinois Hospital, Spring Valley, Illinois, St. Margaret's Health was the hospital that went under. So still, just to make it clear, these are pretty rare events. They only happen a couple times a year, across, it's far less. It's a fraction of 1% of companies that are not able to recover from breaches. But when I see hospitals having to rebuild their networks from scratch, I can't imagine of the disruption that, especially if it's a whole group of hospitals, right? Like that's putting pressure on other area hospitals if they can't take patients in.
Yes. And our health system is so broken that we're not going to.
This is Canada, but I won't speak about Canada's health system.
I'm not going to speak about Canada either, although I will privately. But in the U.S., it's so bad, and this has nothing to do with cybersecurity. But the longer we allow insurance companies to run our healthcare system, we're not going to get better healthcare. And if we don't get better healthcare, and if we don't manage it better, manage the people, the process, and the technology, we're going to continue to have these problems because cybersecurity, let's get back there, cybersecurity doesn't have a chance in our current system because it's not part of the equation. It's just not. It's all about profits. And what is security? It's a cost center.
Yeah, and we know hospitals have a certain amount of pressure on them. How long it takes for an emergency room to get to, to pull someone in. I don't know the right hospital lingo for all of it. I know there is a term for this metric for the amount of time it takes to get seen if you're in critical condition, and you suddenly remove 3 hospitals from a geographical area. That's got to go up in other areas. This has to have an impact on unnecessary deaths.
Yes, people will die. People will absolutely die. If the hospital system goes down, people will die. We haven't seen it at huge levels yet, but this is a fact. And we've got so many other pressures in hospital systems. The friction between the need for quick access, the pressure between IoT or IoMT devices not being down, being functional, focusing on patient care, and quote security. I mean, there are so many points of friction in healthcare that the way our healthcare system is run today, it is not set up to allow for improved processes. Not right now. It's just not. On top of that, because security is a cost center and healthcare in this country is all about profits right now, we're not going to start paying people in healthcare security the same rates as we are for people who go into, let's say, vendor organizations. It's just not that attractive. Yeah. It's like the people who go into security in academia. Thank God for those people, right? Like, they're just not making the same money. They have a mission, they have a purpose. But there are a lot of people who say, I have to sit behind the desk all day. Am I going to make, let's do this very simply, am I going to make $25,000 or $250,000? I know that balance is off, but you see what I'm saying? Like, it's so skewed towards not paying people in these critical institutions like academia, like healthcare, and skewed towards making shiny blinky.
Yep. Yeah, I don't see that. And then there's the critical infrastructure that a lot of which doesn't even have security people, barely have IT people. So yeah, there are definitely some problems there. Let's see, a few more things I want to talk about before we wrap here. So Stephen Schmidt, who was the CISO of AWS before he moved up to Amazon's CISO, moved up a tier when his boss, Andy Jaffe, moved up to CEO of Amazon, has 6 questions every board should ask its CISO, which is pretty interesting. And if I don't have a subscription to this particular media, so I ran it through 12foot.io, 12ft.io, which allows you to read it. And the 6 things Who owns security? What kind of visibility do we have over all of our property? Who has access to what data? Why do they need it and for how long? How do we rank our assets, such as client data or trade secrets, by importance? How many layers of protection do we have? And then how will we respond to an attack? So all pretty good in very high level, like organizational level, planning level stuff that you think would be obvious, but a lot of companies still don't do. You still see companies, big companies, no idea if they're going to pay the ransom or not. No idea how to answer that question. They've seen 1,000 other companies, peers, get hit by ransoms. Haven't worked that out beforehand. How you doing, Tyler?
Oh, I'm still fighting with my bourbon-soaked laptop, so we'll figure it out, but still working on it.
So a very good report here, a multi-source analysis. So this is like a meta-analysis of different attacks, analysis of attacks. So Scientia Institute, Jay Jacobs and Wade Baker's company, took a whole bunch of industry write-ups of how attacks occur, like just breaking down the different techniques and adversaries and stuff like that, and found some super interesting stuff here. So the TLDR of this is there is a tiny fraction of the MITRE attack framework that ever gets used in real life. Yeah, a huge swath of this stuff just never comes up, apparently. So, 85% of attack sub-techniques were never reported by any source. Only 1% of attack sub-techniques were reported by at least 5 sources. A third of attack techniques.
That seems like something I would expect, right? Is that, hey, as an attack, flip it and say, as an attacker, what am I going to focus on? What am I going to do? I'm going to focus on what works. And if I have repeated success with technique A or technique B, I'm going to stay there. I'm not going to leave those until I've exhausted the cash to be made or the fame to be had or whatever it is that I'm doing it for, right? Whatever my incentive structure is, I'm going to leverage and hit those things that are going to work. And then once those stop working, whether it's a person fix or a people fix, a tech fix, a process fix, whatever it is that companies start to put in place, then maybe I'll go to somewhere else. Until then, I'm going to stay on the things that work.
Well, in this, if you understand how attack is designed, this shouldn't be a surprise, right? The MITRE attack framework is meant to be comprehensive. Like, this is everything anyone could possibly do, right? And a lot of vendors will warn you against trying to have an answer for every single thing on the attack framework. Like, it's just not going to be worth it to protect against a lot of this stuff. So we were actually talking to Fortinet's research firm. I'm trying to remember the name of the guy, but they were working on a heat map of the attack framework to show you like what attacks happen and which don't. And that's what this is. This literally, the report contains heat maps of like which items on the attack framework you should worry about and which ones you shouldn't.
I'm thinking all of that should go into our threat management and threat landscape and threat exposure mapping you do at the beginning of your process when you're building your program, right? That's the type of stuff that you should look at. What are the chances of this actually happening to me? What is going to happen if it does, right? That's the information we need to make smart decisions.
And none of it's surprising. Like, if you're familiar with attacks, you're going to read this report and you're going to, I should be worried about PowerShell scripts. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for the heads up on that. But it is useful to see the research actually done. Like, and if it confirms what you already know, great, you're doing a good job. But also now you can argue, maybe we shouldn't dump a ton of cash into solving that because it's going to be a non-problem. It's not something that's likely to be used by attackers. So maybe helps you be a little bit more strategic with your security program and what you spend money on. All right, I think think we'll hit the squirrel story and go out. There's a few other interesting stories here. If you want to check them out, you can go to securityweekly.com/ESW339. And our last one is humor coming from Phil Venables, of all people. So Phil Venables, very well-known security guy, name in the security field, and usually doing some kind of thought leadership piece that's very interesting. But this one is caricatures of security people. And the way I read this is he's making fun of the stereotypes of security people. He's not making fun of these groups of security people directly, which I think some people kind of, at least from how I'm reading it, I think they took it the wrong way. And we're.
I didn't take it the wrong way. I read through this, and my biggest problem with this piece is I think he goes over 15, if I recall correctly, 16 different characters, 16 different stereotypes, and I'm 7 of them, Adrian. I'm 7 of them. That's so sad.
So you didn't like it because it was a mirror?
Yes, I didn't like it because it was right.
I think we need to. I think you need an award. I think that gets you an award. Got to create an award for you, because that's almost half of them. Tyler, you've hit almost half.
I know. It's pretty sad, actually. Yeah, everything from industry analyst to vendor security product manager. I've done a bunch of it.
Cyber savvy board member.
Yeah, I've done it all. And yes, they're right on he's right on every single one of the stereotypes that he's making fun of. Yeah. He pretty much touched a nerve.
My favorites are the CISOs who come from different backgrounds, or in different roles, like the field CISOs, like done being like a CISO, and would rather give advice than worry about going to jail. The CISO turned chief risk officer, the CISO with a military background. Yeah, these are pretty good.
And the illustrations were pretty cool too. Like it's not.
Did you read? Did you read how he created the illustrations?
AI.
They are generated by AI from the text of the item. And I think it did a pretty good job.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Like number 2, what do you think cryptographer turned security guru? Like, what do you picture in your mind? Do you picture glasses and a huge beard?
100%, for sure.
They are stereotypes. Self-appointed thought leader. I'm glad he made that number 1. And each one has a quote. It's incredible that all CISOs don't report directly to the CEO or the board. That's the only way security can ever be effective. I've heard it.
Yes.
Wait, is that one of your 7?
Which one?
Number 1. Self-appointed thought leader.
Of course. Yes, absolutely. I'm self-appointed for sure. And it touches every nerve. I didn't like that one at all. And actually, because it was the first one, I read it and was like, oh my God, this whole article is going to be about me. This is really sad.
Industry analyst. Yeah. We got hit with a bunch of these real quick. Vendor security product manager. Oof. Yep. I feel attacked.
Do you feel attacked or seen?
Yes. Not as much as Tyler does, but I am also in this article, and I don't like it. All right. That's all we've got time for today. Thanks so much, Katie and Tyler, for joining me today. Thanks, Tyler, for hanging out through hard times, booze times.
I think the pain is limited to one lost USB port. I'll survive.
This episode is brought to you by Keyboard Resilience.
Yeah,
100%.
All right, and a big thanks to everybody watching or listening to this week's episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. We've got one more show coming to you next week before Thanksgiving, and then we'll take a week off, and we'll see you then.